Great, and thank you all for joining us today. My name's Todd O'Hare. I'm the President and CEO of the Montana Chamber of Commerce, and it's great to have you all join us here today for lunch and for the program we have this afternoon. We recognize these continue to be odd times, and I visited with some folks earlier coming into this, is that, businesses talk about the understaffing they have and how they like to come to some of these sort of events, but they're understaffed. There's still the COVID threat that hangs over our head. And so I want you to know that we appreciate the fact that you took time and you were able to carve this out of your schedule to attend here today. We don't take it for granted, and we're greatly appreciative of the support that we have here today. And this is, I guess, our first chamber in-person event that we've had in over a year. And it's been quite a year, to say the least. And so over the course of today and tomorrow, the chair of our board, Paul Hopfoff with MDU Resources, he and I will be sharing the podium as we MC through the different panels and the different events that we have going on over the course of the next day and a half. This year we're doing things a little bit differently with the Montana Chamber of Commerce. We have an association underneath the umbrella of the Montana Chamber of Commerce known as the Montana Manufacturing Association. It represents manufacturing sector in the state of Montana, and typically we hold a Montana Manufacturing Association event separately from the Montana Chamber annual meeting. And we decided that this year we would try to combine the two of them to give a little bit more exposure to the chamber board and chamber members about the exciting things that are happening in manufacturing, and conversely give the Montana Manufacturing Association a little bit more exposure to some of the activities within the chamber. And so we're trying to pull these two events together. This event here for today and tomorrow will be focused a lot on manufacturing. I want to thank Scott Seenert, who's the chair of the Montana Manufacturing Association, and he's here today. As I started at the Montana Chamber a little over 2 years ago now, in April of 2019, I came in with the charge to bring additional focus on what the Chamber does and to focus on our strategic plan, Envision 2026. And that strategic plan focuses the Chamber into 4 different areas. It's business climate, making sure that we build a business climate in Montana that is competitive and conducive to business growth and business relocations. It's infrastructure, to make sure that we can move our goods in-state and out-of-state to the more populated sort of markets. Workforce development, which has become an even bigger issue now than it was when the Board of Directors adopted Envision 2026 in 2016. And entrepreneurship, which was recognized as an important pillar to keeping Montana strong, that this was a leading indicator for the state of Montana, and that we lead a lot of the indexes around the country as being one of the leading entrepreneurial states in the country, and that probably doesn't happen by accident, that we need to continue to do what we can to support entrepreneurial thinking and the great entrepreneurial edge that we have in Montana. And so as I work to focus the Montana Chamber more closely on those sort of 4-pillar strategic objectives, we decided to kind of expand staff so that we could more closely focus on the work that we're doing, and so that we can dedicate resources to those 4 pillars. And so I'd like to introduce to you the staff at the Montana Chamber of Commerce, and I want to encourage you to reach out to them if you have questions here during the next 2 days, or even after we leave here, if you have questions about any of the events or some of the work that we're doing. I want to make sure that you can put faces with names. And so Bridger Malum, sitting here at the front table, he's our government relations director. He is Mr. Capitol Hill in Helena. Great person to have. Kimberly Casey is our communications and marketing director. She's in charge of all of the communications we do. Michelle Skinner is over here in the back. Michelle is in charge of our digital operations, both our website and a lot of our digital communications that we do. Peyton Dobbs over there in the corner, she is our member relations coordinator. Matt Olson standing there in the back. Matt is the director of network development. Stacy Dorrington was out at the front. Oh, there's Stacy. She was out at the front table there. Stacy does all of our event management and coordinating. And we've got 3 folks that were not able to join us today. Dee Durand, she is truly the face of the Montana Chamber of Commerce. I think probably everybody here knows Dee. She's been with the Montana Chamber of Commerce for 35 years. This was the first event that she had to miss, and she wasn't comfortable because of COVID concerns in coming here today. So Dee's not here, but she's still with us, and we love her, and she keeps us as a staff in line and on task. We recently hired Charmaine Rogers to come in, and she's going to be our finance director and oversight for our financial reporting, and those were some of the duties that Stacy was doing before. And Tiana Yates, who's not able to join us, and the reason Tiana's not going to be able to join us is she's a new mother. And I want to tell you that Wednesday night, Thursday, and Friday, the Montana Chamber was one of the lead sponsors and hosts at the Montana Association of Career and Technical Educators Conference in Bozeman. And so we went in and we were promoting the Youth Entrepreneur Program to career and technical educators from across the state. And Tiana Yates was one of the individuals on our staff that was there. She led the group through 2.5 days worth of activities. And on Friday, I told her, I said, you look like you're at the pregnancy stage that you're starting to get quite uncomfortable. And she said, yeah, I'm starting to feel it a lot today. Saturday morning, she texted me and said, welcome to the world, our new baby girl. So she is committed to the organization. She ground through those 2.5 days, and I look forward to being able to have her be able to attend an event in person so that you'll get a chance to meet her. And I think that you will absolutely love her and those that I introduced that weren't able to join us today. As we get started, I want to make sure that I thank our sponsors, because it's the sponsors that help make this sort of event possible. We couldn't do it without the sponsors. So I want to thank Alexander Hutton. We've got James and Scott both here at the front table here. Thank you for being sponsors. Boeing, Rich White is here from Boeing. What a powerhouse, not only across the country, but in Montana. First Interstate Bank and Montana State Fund and Stockman Bank, Northwestern Energy are all Treasure State members of the Montana Chamber of Commerce. And so they're not only lead sponsors for events like this, but they support us in every event and every activity we do. Lanny is on our chamber board and was recently, or on our foundation board, and was just elected to chair of the Montana Chamber Foundation Board. He's here. Northwestern Energy, they're everywhere. We've got an entire table of Northwestern Energy folks here. And so I want to thank all of those folks for their gold level sponsor. Let's give them a quick round of applause. Got a couple other sponsor groups here that I want to make sure I acknowledge. Century Gaming, Steve Artenson is here. Thank you, Steve. Charter Communications, the Montana Department of Transportation, and they have a disadvantaged business enterprise program that is within the Department of Transportation. They're here. Appreciate their support. The Montana Youth Apprenticeship Partnership Program, Payne West, Pacific Source Health Plans, Washington Companies, and Western Security Bank. And then at the next level of sponsors, this is our copper levels, we've got First Call Solutions, the Montana Electric Co-op Association, Montana Hydraulics, Sterling CRE Advisors, and Tohall. I see Kim Wild, president of Tohall, is here. Thank you for joining us, and thank you. Let's give all of these sponsors a round of applause for giving us the ability to have this. So as you all know, one of the big strengths that the Montana Chamber of Commerce has is related to legislative advocacy. We have a heavy presence in the Montana State Capitol. The legislative session that we have every year is a big issue for us, and we have a heavy presence in that, and we lead and drive a lot of legislation on the state level. And we think that that's one of the strengths that we offer both to big business and small business across the state of Montana, is that we focus on those issues that you're too busy to get involved with or maybe too complicated. And we've got a team of experts led by Bridger Malum that works on the state government affairs side of things. We're also heavily involved in what goes on the federal level. And we've got great partners that we rely on to keep us informed on what's going on in Washington, D.C., and what's going on at the federal level. And both of those organizations are represented here today. We've got the U.S. Chamber of Commerce that's here today, and the National Association of Manufacturers, which represents that manufacturing sector. So we're blessed to have both of these as partners. They're an incredible amount of a wealth of information and knowledge and expertise. So I think it's interesting that as we see the news over the last couple of days, that you see things starting to move rather rapidly in Washington, D.C. with regard to the infrastructure spending bill and some of the other policies that are being promoted in Washington, D.C. And so to have two experts here today representing the National Association of Manufacturers and the U.S. Chamber, who are both based in Washington, D.C., and are working these issues on a regular basis, they're here to give us some insight on what they see happening as of today, or at least as of this morning, what the latest news is, how they see things evolving. And we've titled this little panel here, A View from the Hill. And I'm happy to introduce Ron Eidschog, who's the Chief of Staff, Government Affairs with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, and Jordan Stoik, who's the Vice President of Government Relations at the National Association of Manufacturers. Jordan's joining us remotely. If we get our technology to work here, and technology is a wonderful thing when it works, and it's a nightmare when it doesn't, but Jordan's going to be joining us remotely. And so why don't I go ahead and hand it over to Ron and let him get started, and then as soon as Jordan is able to join, he'll kind of pick up and deliver a little bit of perspective from his angle as well. Ron?
Thank you. It's great to be here in Billings for two reasons. Number one, because Billings is great, and number two, because it's not Washington, D.C. I want to talk about a couple of different things. I think that we kind of know that Washington, D.C. is a mess right now. The reasons for that are long-standing, they're systemic, they're difficult to deal with. And there's lots of disincentives to compromise. There's lots of disincentives to get things done. I want to talk about some of those. I want to talk a little bit about the situation on the ground, particularly how it relates to infrastructure and reconciliation and some of those top-tier issues. But also what the calendar looks like for the rest of the year and how we deal with that. We, as your partners in Washington, D.C., in the trenches dealing with this stuff, and we, as the business community and allies trying to work on these things throughout the next couple of weeks and months. So things are going great in Washington. Right now, 60% of Americans think that the U.S. is on the wrong track. 2/3 of Americans think that Congress is doing an utterly piss-poor job. And President Biden's numbers are underwater right now. He has a 43 approval to 55% disapproval rating. That's kind of interesting for a couple of different reasons. Number one, President Biden is early in his administration, and having him sink down below 50% so early is kind of an interesting thing, although President Trump never got above 50% during his 4 years. But if you look at Biden's numbers, what's really interesting is when you dig down a little bit more. Right now, 90% of Democrats think that President Biden is doing a bang-up job. Less than 10% of Republicans think that President Biden is doing a bang-up job. So if you're a Democrat, you love what President Biden is doing. If you're a Republican, not so much. And I think that speaks to the growing sense of polarization that we see in Washington. This is not new. Back when Newt Gingrich and the Republican Revolution came in and just blew everything up and took the slide projectors down. In the 1990s, there was a bell curve for Republicans and Democrats, conservatives and liberals. And by and large, those bell curves overlapped quite a bit. As time has gone on, those bell curves have separated. The consistently conservative, the consistently liberal are not focused on the same things, don't agree on the same kinds of solutions, and this growing sense of dissatisfaction has made it difficult to get things done. And like I said earlier, all the way on the right here, President Biden has a 90% approval rating among Democrats and a less than 10% approval rating among Republicans. If you look back at when President W was in the White House at the turn of the century, basically a third of Democrats thought that President Bush was doing an okay job. That was before September 11th. There was a lot of the benefit of the doubt. There was a lot of overlap in priorities. Fewer Republicans think that Biden is doing a good job than Democrats thought that Trump was doing a good job at the similar point in their administrations from 4 years ago. So things continue to get more polarized. We see that expressed in lots of places. Back in 2001, fewer than half the states had legislatures that were had a single party control in the state house, both chambers in the state house and the governor. Now I think it's 42 states. I'm sorry, 38 states, 42 states, something like that, have single party control. We grew from less than half to almost all the states are controlled by one party. And then Montana is also a unicorn. We are at the point in the United States Senate where it is the fewest number of split delegations in Washington since direct election of senators more than 100 years ago. There's only 6 states where you have a Republican and a Democrat in the Senate delegation. And the other thing that we see is that majorities flip. Majorities have become ephemeral in Congress. Up through the Clinton administration, I guess the Clinton administration sort of started, Bush, Obama, Trump, we see majorities flip, sometimes twice during administrations. And that puts a lot of pressure. We see right now we see a lot of pressure from the left, the progressive left, pushing to get wins on the board. Why? Because this majority might not last 2 years or 4 years or 6 years. Get wins on the board now. We saw a similar dynamic on tax reform under the Trump administration, where Republicans controlled across the board. Let's get wins on the board. That creates a big disincentive to compromise, because why compromise on your principles when you could maybe wait 2 years or 4 years and get everything that you want? That's a lot of the politics that's driving all of this talk about reconciliation and infrastructure. But it also leads to a hardening of the discourse in Washington, where, when you're going to go to a protest, you need to, bring your katana, Japanese sword, and layer up for your battles, and why we ended up with a big fence around the Capitol for weeks and weeks and weeks earlier this year. It's really important for us to make sure that we go out there and talk about our positions, talk about why legislation is good or bad, but it's also not cool to threaten legislators who are taking these tough votes. And when I look for political inspiration, what better source than Yoda? Fear leads to anger, anger leads to hate, hate leads to suffering. Take out fear and stick in partisanship. And that's sort of where we're at now. It's really, really difficult to, once you go down the partisan route, to step back from that. And let's look at President Biden's 100-day scorecard. We're about 250 days into the administration, and the 100-day scorecard is still incomplete. What's on that list of things right now, the big wins that the Biden administration has gotten done? Anybody? Any ideas what the Biden administration has gotten through Congress? They got the COVID bill done. Okay, the one thing that was interesting about that COVID bill is that that was the first COVID bill that was done on a partisan basis. Lots of COVID legislation under the previous Congress passed by big bipartisan majorities. President Biden came in, the guy who had spent decades in the Senate, known as someone who was able to cut deals and work with Democrats and Republicans to get things across the finish line. He was the one that the Obama White House sort of iced out because he was too prone to make deals when he was vice president. And the first thing that he did was move on a partisan COVID response bill. The House has done some legislation. They've done some really gangbuster great legislation like the PRO Act, H.R. 1, some of those other really, really terrible things that are out there. The Senate has acted on some things. They passed the China bill that was designed to increase our competitiveness with China and other nations that are out there. And they also passed the big bipartisan infrastructure bill that we would like to see get done. That's our big legislative priority. But again, that was something that wasn't done, that the president didn't put his shoulder to the wheel. And like I said, starting off with something done on a partisan basis makes it really, really difficult to all of a sudden say, oh, come on, let's all hold hands and get our bipartisan bill done. Now we're dealing with the reconciliation bill. We are all in on the reconciliation bill. We want to kill the reconciliation bill done dead. There's lots and lots of bad things that are in that reconciliation package. There's a couple of okay things in there. There's lots of things that there probably are some common sense solutions on, but that package is really, really bad. We could fix a tax thing over here, we could fix a policy thing over there, but we're not going to lose sight of the forest for the trees. We're not going to try to chop these trees down one by one. We're going to try to burn the entire forest down. We've got some success on that, on working together on some of these issues, but we are still in a very, very touch and go point. I think Jordan's going to talk some more about this in a couple of minutes. But we're also trying to get the infrastructure bill done. The infrastructure bill deals with roads and bridges, ports and waterways, some resilience for dealing with a changing climate, some hard infrastructure stuff, investments that I think we all would agree are very, very important. There's also money in there for expanding broadband. I don't know, I think we all recognize that there's lots of places around the country, rural areas, urban areas, that need greater access to broadband. There's lots of money in this package as well. We would like to see this package get done. There's only two challenges we have to getting this package done, and those are the Democrats and the Republicans. As I said, earlier, the progressives are driving the train to try to get wins on the board, and they have linked infrastructure to reconciliation. These two bills are not happening at the same time, probably not going to happen in the same week, but AOC, Nancy Pelosi don't want to vote on infrastructure because it takes away their leverage on getting the reconciliation bill done. And then Republicans are really, really afraid that Democrats are going to tie these two bills together. So they are saying that these two bills are tied together and have done very, very little to help that the infrastructure bill out of the House. This infrastructure bill is a bill that passed with 80-something votes on the Senate side that, flaming liberal Mitch McConnell supported and voted for the infrastructure bill, the Republican leader. It's a really good package. Figuring out how we get this over the finish line is going to be difficult. But the clock is also ticking. And without a lot of wins on the board, without a lot of bipartisan cooperation, just keeping the lights on becomes difficult. The state programs for the state DOTs runs out at the end of the week, at the end of the weekend. There's going to be another vote on the debt ceiling by December 3rd. If that fails, if we don't extend the debt ceiling, that is catastrophically bad for the business community, for the full faith and credit of American debt, for our standing in the world. It's really, really bad. Also need to keep the lights on. Government funding expires on December 3rd, and the Congress has passed a defense authorization bill every year since President Eisenhower was in the White House, and they need to get that done. So there's an awful lot of stuff that needs to get done, just some cats and dogs, traditional legislation that we need to keep moving, let alone those big picture things like the infrastructure bill. and things that we need to kill, like that reconciliation bill. So we're going to be in for sort of a bang-up rest of the year into December. And what I'm struck by is, while there's a lot of talk about all of these issues out there, the big issue that seems to be affecting businesses, large and small, from across the country is workforce. And you don't hear an awful lot of talk from the administration on workforce and out of the Congress on workforce, and certainly one thing that we're going to be pushing on. So I'm going to turn it over to Jordan in 1 second, but number one, I want to say thank you. It's really important to be here. It's great to see so many people. I really appreciate how you left the social distancing right in the front of the room. But as you said, Todd, that this is your first in-person meeting. This is my first opportunity to get out of DC. It's actually my first opportunity to meet my new colleague, Shavanor, who covers Montana with Chris. So please get to know Shavanor too. So we're very, very glad to be here. We appreciate your partnership, your willingness to engage on these issues, and it's going to be a bumpy couple of weeks, so we'll get through it together. But I'm going to turn it over to Jordan, hopefully. If you want, we could take a question before we bring Jordan in.
Well, Ron, I might start with one, just maybe as other folks think of some, or when we get Jordan on. A lot of interesting details, and I like how you visualize the data about the polarization in Congress right now, and that just obviously creates so many challenges. But could you comment, just from the perspective of a major advocacy organization trying to navigate the realities of that? How, I mean, because there's some stuff out there like the U.S. Chamber is doing wasn't it like a bipartisan scoring of lawmakers now? Just could you talk about some of the details and some of the strategy as the premier business advocacy organization of the country, how you're working with both parties to try to get solutions in a very challenging time?
Sure, and we're in a time when Washington is very evenly divided. The Senate is 50-50. Nancy Pelosi has only a couple of Democratic votes that she can lose. So Washington is on a knife's edge. And getting to 218 in the House and getting to 60 or 50 in the Senate on most issues is going to require some Democrats and Republicans working together. What we noticed is that there were some Democrats who were voting with us and some Democrats that we weren't talking to. 4 or 5 years ago, we started to talk to some of those moderate Democrats where we shared some common interests to make sure that we could get some things done. We've been doing a scorecard at the U.S. Chamber since 1965. It, up to a couple of years ago, had been a very white hat, black hat kind of exercise. If you voted with us 70% of the time, lifetime, you would get an award from us. We would likely endorse you. If you scored less than 70% with us, we'd go and burn your house down. Now, in the context of trying to get votes on and wins on things like USMCA, some of the other issues that are out there, and you're either with us or against us, strategy doesn't necessarily always work. And we changed our scorecard to add a 10% leadership component and a 10% bipartisanship component. One of the things that we've seen in Washington, things are not coming up for votes. And when they do come up for votes, they're in these big, ginormous packages. Jordan's going to talk about the reconciliation bill, but essentially that bill is the progressives' wish list. It's got everything under the sun. That could be 15 separate bills with votes, but it's packaged into this one thing, and there's going to be it's going to be virtually impossible to strike out provisions or vote against provisions. So on the leadership component of the scorecard, we're recognizing members who are taking a strong stand on issues. We ask members to co-sponsor these bills long before they come up for a vote, and it gives us an opportunity to highlight the work that people are doing, that members are doing when they're putting their shoulder to the wheel. And then on the bipartisanship thing, if you're a Republican and you sponsor Democratic bills, or you're a Democrat and you sponsor Republican bills, you get credit. so long as it's not a bill that we oppose. So you're Republican, you co-sponsor Pro, that's not good. You're a Republican, you co-sponsor a Democratic infrastructure initiative, that's good. So what we wanted to do was sort of create some ground where a group of Democrats could come over and work with Republicans and create a safe space. And then, you know, we're sort of stuck in the middle on some of these issues where we've taken a lot of flack from even our friends for endorsing some Democrats who helped us get USMCA done. We wouldn't have gotten Trump's #1 priority, the biggest priority from the last Congress for the business community, USMCA. We wouldn't have gotten that done without a couple of Democrats coming over to support that. And we endorsed 6 times as many Republicans in the House as we did Democrats. So I think that's a really interesting question, but I'm going to turn it over to Jordan, who looks great.
And thanks, Todd and Ron. It's great to join you here virtually. Though, as I was telling Ron earlier today, I sure wouldn't mind being in Montana right now, but so I'm a little jealous of Ron that he gets to be in your great state while I'm joining you from my basement home office in the Washington, D.C. suburbs. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention I grew up in neighboring South Dakota. So out here in D.C., people tend to call where we're all from the big square states, but I never take the opportunity to, or I never miss the opportunity to let them know how wrong they are, and that it's actually called God's country. So again, I wish I could be with you all today in person, but a quick and related funny story, if I could, and well, at least I think it's, but regardless, I think you'll all appreciate it as well. I've known Senator Daines' Chief of Staff, Jason Thielman, for a number of years, someone I'm sure many of you know as well, a great guy. I was in his office on Capitol Hill a few years ago, and as I was waiting for him to wrap up another meeting, I'm looking at the wall in the senator's office, all these beautiful pictures on the wall of Montana. And at the time, I was working for then Congresswoman Kristi Noem, who is now one of your neighboring governors. And so I was looking at these photos, and Jason came in, and I said, man, considering we're neighboring states, Montana sure is a lot prettier than much of South Dakota. And I thought Jason would say something, you know, in response to make me feel a little bit better about my home state, but instead he just looked at me deadpan and said, "You're right, Montana is much prettier." So Jason is always on message, and he's doing a great job for the senator. All right, now that we've established Montana's photographic superiority, I just wanted to take the opportunity to thank you again, not only for allowing me to join you, but for the partnership. The Montana Chamber of Commerce is a valued partner for the National Association of Manufacturers, and we look forward to continuing that important partnership in the months and years ahead as we promote policies that will make Montana and the entire United States the best place to do business. So let me jump back into some of the content here. Ron did a great job of giving kind of the lay of the land. I'll attempt to build on that a little more and talk about the status of the budget reconciliation bill, or the Democrats' Build Back Better bill, that's what they've named it, which started off at around a $3.5 trillion tax increase and spending bill, but now appears to be kind of skinny down to somewhat in the $2 trillion range. At the National Association of Manufacturers, we had spent all year advocating against this multi-trillion-dollar tax increase and spending bill. Earlier this year, we undertook an economic study in partnership with some really well-respected economists at Rice University in Texas. And we looked at many of the tax increases that were being discussed at the time, like a corporate tax increase from 21% to 25%, an increase in taxation on overseas earnings for business manufacturers and businesses who operate and sell globally, a capital gains tax increase, and an increase, importantly to note, but very harmful, an increase back to just under 40% for individual taxpayers, which of course is the rate that the vast majority of manufacturers and businesses in America are taxed at those small and medium-sized employers who are organized as pass-through entities. So we took a look in the study of what would happen if these things went into effect, and the findings of the study were quite shocking. 1 million jobs would be lost just in the first 2 years after implementation, followed by an additional 600,000 jobs lost each year for the next decade. So our message to lawmakers on Capitol Hill is and has been very consistent. Tax reform in 2017 was rocket fuel for manufacturing and for the entire economy. In fact, in 2018 and 2019, on the heels of the 2017 tax reform, manufacturing saw some of the fastest growth in 20 years in wage growth, jobs, and investment. So our question really to lawmakers is, why do we want to undo that? Our policies should be about finding a way to make the next dollar invested in manufacturing here in America, and not about taking us back to archaic anti-growth policies of the past. And so we've been actively engaged working with our state partners like all of you, as well as Ron and his colleagues at the Chamber and other friends in the business community to try to tell that message to Democratic lawmakers. We have a great champion on, we have some great champions on tax issues in Montana, like Steve Daines and Matt Rosendale. And we're talking with Senator Tester as well. We're going to continue to talk with him. He's listening to us, but we could definitely use your help in trying to make our case to Mr. Tester. Other key Democratic lawmakers that we've been speaking frequently with include Senator Manchin from West Virginia and Senator Kyrsten Sinema of Arizona, who continue really to play kind of an outsized role in these negotiations. In fact, right now, I think that as we sit here today, the talks really in these negotiations on the tax and spending bill are mainly between the White House and Senators Manchin and Sinema. In fact, you may have noticed over the weekend, just yesterday, that Senator Manchin spent the day at the president's weekend home in Delaware. So Senator Manchin has been skeptical of the overall price tag of this bill, indicating he doesn't want to support anything more than $1.5 trillion. Senator Sinema, on the other hand, has been much less open in terms of in the public and in the media about talking about her position, though we believe she has very real concerns with the vast majority of the tax increases that were included in the initial draft of this legislation. And as a result, we believe plans to increase the corporate and personal tax rates are in real jeopardy of falling out of this package. Negotiations are now centered on trying to find other ways to generate, for Democrats to generate revenue, which is really DC speak. Generating revenue is DC speak for increasing taxes. Everything is incredibly fluid at the moment and really changing, by the day, frankly, by the hour. But as of this morning, as of a couple hours ago, we understand the top line number of these negotiations to be about $1.9 trillion, which it's a massive package, but it's far from the $3.5 trillion that was initially proposed. So I think you're starting to see the impact of some of these more moderate Democratic senators and members of the House of Representatives who are weighing in. On the revenue and tax front, our latest intelligence suggests that they are now, in the absence of kind of a basic rate increases on the corporate and personal side, they are looking at a number of different other ways to find revenue, including things like increasing the corporate rate on international business activity, a plan to tax annually capital gains, regardless of whether assets have been sold. This is referred to as the mark-to-market taxation scheme. Other things that we believe are being looked at would be a tax on stock buybacks, some type of surcharge on the wealthiest Americans. This has been referred to by some Democratic lawmakers as the billionaires tax. We also understand that a few other things are being looked at as well, including a minimum 50% corporate tax rate, as well as increased IRS enforcement, which would essentially be appropriating more money to the IRS in order to generate more taxpayer returns on the backside. As I mentioned earlier, these things are incredibly fluid and they're changing constantly. So everything I mentioned is based off our recent intelligence gathering and could absolutely change, probably will change. I wanted to provide that background and that information, though, just as a way to show you again how quickly these things are moving, and really also to point out in the United States Senate that is 50 Democrats and 50 Republicans, any one senator really has an enormous amount of leverage. In looking specifically at this week, the White House has been pushing Democrats on Capitol Hill to reach a deal on the framework of this tax and spend bill in order to be able to put the separate trillion bipartisan infrastructure bill on the House floor for a vote potentially as soon as this week. As Ron mentioned, this bipartisan infrastructure bill is something that we at the NAM are also very much in support of. So its fate at the moment is a little bit unclear until we know what the status of Democrats' progress that they're making on the separate larger tax and spending bill. President Biden is leaving Washington, D.C. this week for a big overseas trip. He's heading to Europe, where he's going to Rome for an international meeting, and then to Scotland for a United Nations climate change conference. That is really kind of the push that the White House is making, saying we need to see action on preferably both of these bills, but at least trying to get the bipartisan infrastructure bill across the finish line before he leaves town, Washington, D.C. on Thursday. So there's still a lot. There's still a lot of unknowns. Things are changing very, very quickly. We're in the same position as kind of Ron highlighted that the chamber is in terms of being opposed to the harmful tax increases and some other harmful labor policies and price control policies in the pharmaceutical manufacturing space that are contained in the much larger 2 to 3.5 trillion, whatever the number is going to be in the large tax and spend bill. But we're very much in favor and have been advocating to get the separate bipartisan infrastructure, core, hard roads, bridges, ports, rail, those sorts of transformational infrastructure investments passed and across the finish line. So I know with things changing as quickly as I mentioned they have been, Ron and myself and our colleagues, of course, are staying laser focused on this. So we'd be glad to continue keeping you all informed as things change here this week. But with that, Todd, I know I've spoken for a long time here, probably for too long, but I'd be happy to turn it back over to you now. Perhaps we can take some questions. I know Ron and I would appreciate hearing what's on your mind.
So I think we've got some time here for some questions, and I'll start it out. I'd like the two of you to put on your crystal ball hat, if you will, and given what you know and the timelines that are forthcoming with the 1st of December and the debt ceiling. And then once we get into the first year, we start into kind of a hyper political season, right? So can you give us like your best estimate on what you think will happen and how the political season, once we get into 2022, how that will impact this and how it's going to shape everything?
Yeah, I think that there's I don't know that there's a simple answer to that question. I think that there are a couple of different factors. Number one, the point from earlier that Biden has very few wins on the board makes the reconciliation package really a do or die. It's almost too big to fail. It's also too big to pass. So I think that the Biden administration, Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, they're going to have to figure out what they're going to do with that. I think that Jordan did a good job of describing just how many moving pieces there are. But what they're trying to do is come up with a recipe for a secret sauce that's going to get them to 218 and 60. And the things that Manchin and Sinema are looking for are a little bit different from each other. And if you satisfy Manchin and Sinema, where does AOC go? Where does the rest of the squad go? Where do the rest of the progressives go? So that the calculus is extraordinarily difficult. If they win and there is a reconciliation bill, I think that Republicans feel awful confident that they're going to beat the hell out of Democrats on that vote. And that they are very confident that they stand a very, very good chance of taking back the House and perhaps the Senate as well. Let's do the alternate. Reconciliation fails. I think Republicans are going to whack Democrats over the head with the reconciliation regardless. So even if it fails, they're going to hammer them and use reconciliation as a cudgel. And I think even in that scenario, Republicans feel quite confident about what they will take back majorities next year. I think that, but I think that Biden, Pelosi, Schumer feel an enormous amount of pressure to deliver on something. And that's why you see the Biden administration, Pelosi, Schumer negotiating with themselves to try and figure out how they're going to get, they're going to drop the rate, all of this kind of stuff. For us, I think we can't take our eyes off the ball yet. We need to deal with what we're dealing with now, and that's the reconciliation bill. It's going to have a huge impact on what happens next year. We don't know how all of that stuff is going to work out. We don't know what factors are going to happen between now and Christmas and debt ceiling and the election and all that kind of stuff. We have to focus on killing reconciliation and trying to get infrastructure over the finish line. And it's going to be really important as we go forward on reconciliation. Well, if we only drop the rate down to this, and if we kick out the really, really bad provisions in the reconciliation, or some of them, our message is this. You can put as many chocolate chips as you want in that turd burger, we're still not going to eat it. So, I don't know, Jordan, you got anything you want to add? He's stunned.
I'm sorry about that. I was really having a difficult time hearing, Ron, what you said. So I'm sure you covered everything, but if there's anything specific you want me to respond to, tell me if you could re-ask it or re-ask any questions. I apologize. I'm just having difficulty hearing on my end. Relationships are at the core of this business, as you all know. Relationships are at the core of, I think, your businesses and your day-to-day lives, but it's no different in the lobbying world on Capitol Hill as Ron and I, kind of toil away daily on Capitol Hill, or at least virtually. It's building relationships, and the best way to do that is by having lawmakers hearing from their local, their constituents, their business owners, their manufacturers, their folks on Main Street. So often we throw out statistics like I did earlier, it's impactful to go up on Capitol Hill and say, if you put these archaic tax increases back into place, it's going to result in X number of jobs lost. That's impactful. But what's even more impactful is if folks come to their lawmakers and say, I employ 125 people, manufacturers in Montana. And if this happens, this will be the consequence. I'm going to have to lay off 5 people. I won't be able to give bonuses. I'm not going to be able to invest. It's going to hurt my operation, my workers, my employees in this way. So, working through whether it's the chamber or the NAM to help engage and better build those relationships is key. And in an environment that is, and I know that this was discussed a little. Ron mentioned kind of the polarized dynamic. In this increasingly polarized dynamic, at the end of the day, relationships are really the main thing that are going to help cut through that. And so I know there's going to be a lot of changes. There always is, historically speaking, in a first term, going back to the end of the Second World War. The president's party typically loses around 25 House seats on average historically in the first midterm. Next year, of course, is going to be a midterm. So historically speaking, we're anticipating we will see a lot of turnover in the House. And of course, we also happen to be in the first cycle, the first year. Next year will be the first election after the once every 10 years redistricting process. I know all of you are paying a lot of attention to that as well, because again, being from a South Dakotan with the at-large state, I'm jealous that you're getting another congressional seat. Congratulations. But you're seeing how difficult, I think, from what I've read, even going from 1 to 2 in terms of the redistricting process. I think that's, you compare that to a state like Texas or Florida or New York, where they're fighting over dozens of congressional districts. It's emblematic, I think, of the partisanship that we're seeing. I'll wrap it up by saying the best way, again, to cut through that partisanship is, with the personal relationship.
Yeah, Tom Speak out of Lewistown, Speak of Manufacturing. I believe that to consumers and business owners both, one of the huge issues that we're staying awake nights with is the inflationary trends we're seeing now and expectations. We're just starting down what might be a long path. And I believe that two of the major contributing factors for that are the labor shortage, inability to get workers, and our supply chain crisis that we've got. I think that in visiting in manufacturing communities, especially, Jordan, I know that you're well aware of this. That's a huge issue right now, and as long as we can't get business going, we're going to be contributing to inflationary pressures, I think. What is Washington doing, saying? What's the projections from you guys of how long we're going to be struggling with this? And while we have these stalemates in the quagmire of bills that are stuck in partisan issues, the rest of America's out here kind of flailing with some of these things. What's Washington doing? What are they going to do?
So I very much appreciate that question, and that's one of the things that sort of keeps me up at night, where, you know, I think that Jordan and I are fortunate to travel around the country in person or virtually and talk with business leaders everywhere. And, you know, the issues of workforce, issues of supply chain, inflation, all of those issues are really important and are really not on the congressional agenda. You know, when I say that we value the partnership, when Jordan says that we value the partnership that we have, we really mean it, because we're not, U.S. Chamber is not turning votes. You guys are turning votes. And I worry that when you're overwhelmed as a business owner with whether you can actually keep your doors open, because are you going to have people to run the checkout register, or run the lathe, or run the millworking machine, or something, that's a much more important thing. And, you know, the Sturm and Drang of Pelosi and AOC and McCarthy and Scalise going at it sucks some of the attention and some of the willingness to engage on those issues. So more specifically on your question, I don't know what the answer is. Is COVID a factor in this? Yes, but it's not the only excuse. We can't blame inflation, supply chain, and workforce issues only on COVID. Also, I think that all of those issues show why we actually need some Democrats and Republicans to step up and work together on some of these issues. The infrastructure bill is a good example of that. It started out as a gang of 8 senators. Senator Sinema, Democrat from Arizona, Senator Rob Portman, Republican from Ohio, came together and sort of led the group of 8 that expanded to the group of 22 that put that big bill together. Is that bill perfect? No, but it would help address some of these issues. But getting rid of supply chain bottlenecks and all of a sudden snapping our fingers and making sure that we have enough qualified workers, that's not something that Congress can do. What Congress should be doing is planning for the future and dealing with some of those really difficult issues like immigration, H-1B, H-2B, all the visa categories that are out there. The administration should be working on those things too. Border security, clearly part of that issue. Dealing with training and making sure that we have workers who are going to be able to work in our facilities, dealing with the skills gap, all of those kinds of issues. And we are losing sight of so many of those issues where we could build bipartisan consensus, and we're stuck in this fight on reconciliation. So, did you hear that, Jordan?
Yeah, Ron, I did. I apologize if I am repetitive here. I got the question. I didn't hear everything that you said, but I would start by saying, in terms of the question on supply chain problems and inflation, I think I heard, Ron, you mentioning infrastructure. It's a good opportunity because this is something that I hear a lot from members of Congress when we advocate for that $1 trillion bipartisan infrastructure bill. There seems to be a lot of concern with inflation being problematic, and it's a very real concern, that spending $1 trillion on infrastructure is only going to make that issue worse. I'm not an economist. I've talked with our in-house economist who has explained in great detail to me why he doesn't believe that would be the case. Core infrastructure investment that enters kind of the bloodstream, if you will, over a number of years. These are lifetime, generational investments that don't just enter the system immediately. So I think it's important to note that, and it's part of one of the many reasons why we are supportive of that bipartisan core infrastructure bill. On supply chain more broadly, I think I would note two things. There are many lawmakers who want to put in place policies that are restrictive or retaliatory, I should say, towards manufacturers and other businesses who operate globally, as a way to say, basically to force them to come back to the United States, to increase our capacity here in America. That's all well and good. We want, as I mentioned earlier, we want the next manufacturing dollar to be spent here in the United States, but we also understand in a global environment that we have many manufacturers and businesses who need to operate globally. So from the NAM's perspective, to help with the supply chain issue and our capacity here in the United States, it's not about being punitive and punishing people to make them come back. It's about making America the best place to do business. We should have the most competitive tax and regulatory policies that give manufacturers and other businesses a reason to say, you know what, it's now just as competitive, if not better, to be doing this in the United States, because that's maybe the reason, not all the time, but oftentimes that's a reason why they may have gone offshore to do certain activities. And so we don't want to be punitive. We want to be to incentivize. And I'll just close by saying, when we look at these harmful, really bad tax policies that are being debated right now, that really helps make the point. Why do we, I mentioned earlier, all of the best in 20 years in terms of manufacturing growth and wages and jobs. That was as a result of smart regulatory and tax policy. Now we're looking to Democratic lawmakers are looking to not only go back to where we were, make things even worse and less competitive. That's not going to help increase domestic capacity for supply chain issues here in the United States.
Hi, I'm Thomas Miller. I had a couple of thoughts first. I thought that it was appropriate that you called some of our representatives gang members, so that was good. And I also wanted to comment on Jordan talking about finding intelligence in Washington, D.C. I think he called it gathering intelligence, but I know what he meant. But the question that I had was the cybersecurity legislation that's coming through in Washington seems to be coming piecemeal. And I just wondered if you've looked at that as it relates to the infrastructure bill that's coming forward, and how would that affect mostly small to medium business in this scenario?
Thank you. Jordan, do you want to take that first? He didn't hear it? Okay, I'll start. So, I think that's another area that we're actually very concerned in working on. And you have the interplay of what the agencies are doing, you have what Congress wants to do, and you have what the business community needs. One of the things that I do is I sign off on all our letters and comments and everything that goes up. And we are sending up a letter later today dealing with the Trump era executive order on some of the cyber stuff. So this is an issue that's top of mind for us. It is very piecemeal. There has been some good work to get legislation halfway into shape, and we can maybe get that out a little bit more. We've been working with Senator Peters and Senator Johnson on the committee on the Senate side. So I think we can get there. But again, this is one of those issues where they are not spending as much time talking about this as they should in the era where we're talking about reconciliation. I think that this issue, you're also dealing with the problem that, businesses are being attacked and businesses are part of the solution, and you're dealing with regulators who feel like regulation is the first step that we need to throw out there rather than cooperating, when we actually have a pretty good track record of success in sort of the cooperative approach and the cooperative model on a lot of these kinds of things. So we're going to continue working on it. I don't know that we're going to see a cyber bill by the end of the year. I don't know if we're going to see a cyber bill by next spring. It's something that I think we're going to be in no matter what. It's too important an issue to sort of leave out there, but I don't know how it's going to ultimately work out.
Yes, sir.
Cyber.
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think I would two quick things I would say. That the devil on something like this is always going to be the details, right? The tax and reconciliation spending bill, as well as the bipartisan infrastructure bill, have really kind of largely sucked up all of the oxygen to date, the last 6 months or so on Capitol Hill. There is some separate activity, particularly happening at the committee levels on cybersecurity. That's where there are a number of lawmakers who, it may not be in the front pages of the newspaper because it's not as attractive of a fight, but this is really something that's kind of a bipartisan issue. It needs to be a bipartisan issue, but again, the particulars, particularly on the how it would be implemented from a regulatory standpoint, are important. I would also note that some of our cybersecurity challenges, whether it be from some of our unfriendly regions in the country, where some of these attacks are happening, people who aren't traditionally our partners or our best partners, I should say, on the global stage. The administration has a lot of tools, whether it's trade or sanctions based, to push back and hopefully prevent some of these activities. And so it's something that, and again, I apologize if I was repetitive there, but it's something that there's more specific questions, I'd be glad if you want to have anyone follow up with me, and we could get some more specific information if there's a particular bill or something that you're interested in.
All right, Ron and Jordan, I'm going to try to ask a question from back here and see if, Jordan, one, can you hear me better from back here if I ask a question from here? Okay, awesome. And we'll actually have you answer this one first because Ron's had the advantage the whole time here. We'll see how he does second.
Chamber rocks.
So for both of you, Jordan first, obviously there's a lot of curiosity and concern around President Biden's announcement recently on his directive to OSHA and the rulemaking process on vaccine mandates and, of course, how that impacts business enforcement of it, et cetera. Would love to hear each of your takes on not only your organization's perspective of that, but also the chatter you're hearing on the Hill, knowing that it's still in the rulemaking process, so it's not necessarily in Congress's hands right now, but just even a sense of where some of the conversations are going with this and what you might know that folks on the ground in Montana might not yet. I think we'd appreciate some insights if you have some to share.
It's a great question, and it is certainly on the mind of our members. At the NAM, we've got 14,000 different member companies across all 50 states, every congressional district, and so we are hearing from a lot of them on this issue. I'm guessing it's on your minds as well. From our perspective, we have members who are in favor of something like this. We've got members who are not. We've got members who are just concerned and somewhat, the implementation would really, the details there will matter. So the role that we have played is really kind of so far has been a convener, if you will, kind of an aggregator of our feedback from across our membership and making sure that folks at the White House, in the National Economic Council, as well as the Labor Department, are aware because they need to hear manufacturers' voices. And I think you all you have a number of different ways through your relationships with your lawmakers. Even though this is a regulatory issue right now, Congress has a lot of sway here. So work through your trade associations and through your relationships with your lawmakers to make sure that your voice is heard on this, because again, this is one of those things where it's kind of a typical Washington, D.C., one size fits all potential mandate that may not be workable. And something like this would need to obviously be very workable. Would need to be workable if it's put in place.
And I'm going to just follow on with that. I'm going to agree with everything that Jordan said. One of the really important things that we've done on this issue is, like I said earlier, Jordan said the same thing, the partnership is really important. Todd joins us once a week or once every other week for calls that we do with all the state chamber presidents that we've been doing since the beginning of the pandemic to sort of talk through all of the issues that are bubbling up out there. And we did something that we don't usually do on all of this mandate stuff, and we actually came up. There's one thing coming out of OMB. There's another thing coming out of the agencies, and we prepared two separate letters that are just the questions that our members are asking. Like government contractor, you're a company that's both a government contractor and working with the private sector. So now you have two different sets of requirements. There's test or vaccine, and then there's straight vaccine. How do you deal with that if you've got your contractors on the third floor and your regular salespeople on the second floor? What's the standard? So we've been trying to work through all of those very, very specific questions. You all have helped with that. And we're trying, I think that Jordan, you can understand a little bit of frustration and share the frustration that we don't have an answer to this question. We need to be able to talk to the administration about these kinds of things. They've actually been somewhat receptive to listening to us. I think we're going to need to see more action on their part on dealing with some of the questions that we're raising, because we're trying to deal with the very practical stuff. And I think Jordan is right, where we're in the same situation where some companies are really glad with these standards because they don't want to be the vaccine police. Some companies think that this is the worst thing in the world, and trying to come up with something that the business community can deal with generally is a pretty tall order, and something we're trying to work through.
Another one over here.
Sure.
Jack Genoy from the Billings Chamber of Commerce. I know you're both rather focused on Congress, so I hope this isn't a question you're too poorly equipped to handle, but I'm wondering if we take dysfunction in Congress as a bit of a given for the foreseeable future, do you see any opportunities where state and local governments can really step up, fill some of that gaps, and create a strong business environment in their jurisdictions? Give Bridger some advice for the next Montana legislative session.
Do you want to start with that, Jordan? Did you hear it?
I heard it was in regards to state and local. Tony, could you repeat that for me? Yeah, in kind of our federalist system with our state governments being kind of the laboratories. I mean, that's at times where again, getting back to that partisan gridlock, it's often where I think Washington, D.C. can and sometimes does and really should look more to the states. I think when you look at something as simple as like the budgeting process, you have state legislators who have to meet appropriations and budgeting deadlines. They have to balance budgets. These are things that unfortunately are kind of a foreign concept for federal lawmakers right now. I think areas in labor policy, in infrastructure and transportation are kind of ripe, if you will, for federal lawmakers to look at what is happening in the states and what can work, and what hasn't worked. I think far too often the federal government at times thinks that it has the prescription for everything, when perhaps lawmakers can look back to what has or hasn't worked at the state level.
I'm going to follow up on that. Your question terrifies me. 5-word answer. California. Do you want California legislators taking the lead? I think we have seen states in many areas stepping into the void that Washington has left. But it's not, I think I might be more comfortable with a Montana-style approach than a California or New York or Massachusetts style on that. But if you look at sort of what's coming out of California in terms of AB5 and gig workers and things like that, that's a terrible national precedent. And a lot of AB5 is baked into the reconciliation package. I think that you sort of see the interplay of the dysfunction in Washington and how that comes down to state houses. And you all are certainly much better to deal with that than I am. And you see how sort of COVID mandates have turned into campaign issues in state house races and things like that. So yeah, we're seeing the states step in some areas. It's causing really big problems in other areas. That's another reason on the Committee of 100 that you guys sit on, that Todd sits on, where looking at some of these different challenges that are bubbling up in the states are going to be things that we need to collectively work on and work together. So, yes.
All right, I'm going to do another question from back here. And I was curious from both of you, and this is more about sort of what you're hearing and more on the congressional procedures component. There's talk occasionally about obviously like ending the filibuster, doing something different with that, or changing the size of the U.S. Supreme Court, or even contemplating changing the size of the House, et cetera. At this stage, would you both say that those are more or less distractions, or do you think those conversations are going to pick up again once, maybe once the questions are answered when it comes to these two big pieces of legislation? Are we going to hear more about procedural change as the partisanship continues to really, continue to be a huge factor and a growing factor in how we do policy making these days?
So the way that I normally answer that question is to point out how something happens in Washington is oftentimes more important than what is happening, what the subject is. The perfect example of that is the reconciliation bill. Reconciliation is a process where you don't need a supermajority in the Senate, so everything is crammed into this one bill, and now the House is fit to be tied to figure out how they're going to work their magic and get to a team for it. So that process question is very, very important. We're spending actually a lot of time looking at the process as a tool that both sides are deploying more regularly. And it's actually kind of funny, and I'm not going to pull it up, but I've actually got 20 slides on the back of my presentation dealing with the filibuster. So at the cocktail hour, if anybody's really, really interested in the filibuster, come and we'll talk. We actually hired the former parliamentarian from the House to come and work for us, and he's working on our state and local government initiative. But these procedural issues are really, really important. They make your eyes glaze over. They're really boring. They're really technical, but they are very, very important, and it governs how much Biden is going to be able to get done. I don't see that they're going to change the size of the Supreme Court anytime soon. There could be perhaps growing pressure on the filibuster. I don't think between now and the end of the year or into next year, but that pressure is only going to grow as those sort of bell curves and the polarization continues.
Yeah, I think very short answer to the question. I think yes, the answer is yes, that we will see continued pressure. I don't think this issue is going to go away. That is also, I think, why it was important for many Republicans from their perspective in the Senate to support that bipartisan $1 trillion infrastructure as a way to show from their perspective, from a process perspective, Republicans by and large, probably down to every senator, don't want the filibuster to go away. Filibuster of course, is your friend if you're can be your friend or can be your foe. Right now, the Republicans don't want to see the filibuster go away. It probably would have gone away already had there been 50 votes in the Senate to do so. Unless something changes, unless kind of this fever, this partisan fever, if you will, breaks, I think this is going to be a live issue, for future Congresses. I don't think things will change in this Congress with this current makeup, but it's going to come back around.
All right. So to both of you, I just want to, because there's just been so much discussed here, and I speak on behalf of the room here in appreciation of both of you for making the time, and Ron especially for making the travel as well and being able to be here and visiting with us about these important issues. I just wanted to make sure that each of you had a couple minutes for just some closing thoughts because we've talked about so many different things, and just any message you want to leave. I mean, again, considering that this audience is business people from around this state, not only executives but also advocates. What else can you leave us inspired with, given some of the doom and gloom in D.C.? And Jordan, we'll start with you on that, and we'll close with Ron before Todd moves us to the next part of the agenda.
Well, thank you, Richard, and thank you, Todd, and everyone. Again, thanks for letting me join you. Things are messy right now in D.C., but I think we all, we wake up, put 2 feet on the floor each day, and we need to remember that as bad as things may seem sometimes, we're still the greatest country, still the greatest republic in the world, and we can get through this difficult time. We actually think, and I believe, we at the NAM, and I believe that the business community actually has a important part in helping us kind of lead us out of the darkness, if you will, in support of common sense, pro-economic growth policies. And I finish with, again, it's your voices, your stories matter. There's nothing more powerful than that. People like myself and like Ron, we can throw out statistics and lobby and do the best we can. And I'd like to think we do a pretty good job, but your individual stories matter. And so stay engaged, and let us know if you have questions on how to do it, or when you should do it, or what's the most impactful way. Let us know. We'll be glad to help you out with that. And thanks again. Appreciate you having me here.
And I'm going to double down on what Jordan said. I mean, it's us working together that's going to be able to make a difference. Look, Senator Tester is not going to listen to the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. We've gone for his head a couple times. We failed. He doesn't listen to us. He listens to you. He listens to Jordan and NAM a little bit more. So working together, that helps. On the happy note, instead of that rather bleak note, don't give up on this stuff. Our good colleague, Steve Roberts, the president and CEO of the West Virginia Chamber, had his annual meeting and invited my new boss, Suzanne Clark, to moderate a panel discussion with Senator Manchin and with Senator Shelley Moore Capito, the other senator, the Republican senator from the other unicorn state, with a Democrat and a Republican in the Senate. And at that event, into a question that Suzanne asked, Senator Manchin said, "I'm not supporting a $3.5 trillion package." The room didn't understand how big of a deal that was. We actually had to get reporters. We had to secretly get that to the reporters so that they would actually write the story that Manchin dropped this huge bombshell that he wasn't going to support a $3.5 trillion package. And that's because the business community in his state was talking with him and working together. So the people who are sitting in this room, rather than working on the shop floor in their manufacturing industry and taking the time to get together and investing in strong leaders and putting on these great events. I saw that you've got the Chamber Foundation meeting over there. Our Chamber Foundation, we're doing a lot of work in the workforce space. We're putting in our blood, sweat, and tears on all of this stuff. And at the end of the day, we can make a difference. And as Jordan was pointing out, we're still the greatest country in the world. We've still got that First Amendment, and we've got to go up there and advocate and petition for a redress of our grievances. And we can do it respectfully, honestly, and collaboratively, and we're going to get some stuff done. So we're glad to be here. Thanks for having us, and we'll see you soon.
want to thank both Jordan and Ron. I want to really thank you for ending on a more of an upbeat sort of note here, because I think there was a number of us that were thinking that we might need to search out the nearest cliff to jump over, because this was not the most uplifting of sort of messages to start a conference with. So thank you, Ron, and appreciate your being here, Jordan, and zooming in and taking time. We appreciate it. Make sure you say hello to my, Jordan can't hear me. Say hello to my good friend Jeff back there at the National Association of Manufacturers, and I want to thank them all again for being here. And I think that both of them left us and ended with a message that I think it's easy for us as Montanans to take for granted, in the sense that we have personal relationships, we can make connections with both of our United States senators, right? If you're in a state like California, you probably got to go through 3 layers of security and 2 layers of gatekeepers in order to be able to get a message in. But most of us, if not all of us, have met Senator Tester and know Senator Tester. Most, if not all of us, have met Senator Daines and know Senator Daines. We should not take that for granted. In a 50-50 Senate, I think it's important that as individuals, individual businesses, we reach out to those folks and make our voices heard, because we have something that not many other states have, and that is access to our elected officials. So thanks again. Appreciate your being here, Ron. I know it's a long ways out here. We look forward to having you out here again soon. So our chair, Paul Hopfoff, of the Board of Directors, is about to wrap up his tenure as chair of the Board of Directors, and it's been a real pleasure for me to get to work with Ron with Paul over the last year. I feel bad that he got to chair the Montana Chamber Board of Directors during a time when we weren't meeting in person. He chaired more Zoom meetings, I think, than anybody I know, and I've gotten to really appreciate Paul and have appreciated his guidance and his hand on the organization as a whole. Paul hails from Glendive, Montana, with MDU resources, and so Paul is here to MC the next section of our panel. Please welcome the chairman of the Board of Directors, Montana Chamber of Commerce, Paul Hopfoff.
Got to move the mic. I'm not as tall as Todd. Thank you, Todd. I think after those 50 Zoom meetings, it was the last 3 he could avoid reminding me I was still on mute. So I'm getting better. But a few years ago, the Montana Chamber Foundation focused on the silver tsunami as part of a statewide economic update series. The notion being that as the Montana population grows older, more strains on Montana's labor pool will be felt even more. It's about that same time I read a book on demographics across the country, and at the time of publishing of that book, Montana was in a 5-way tie for the 5th oldest state in the nation, which doesn't portend well for the state's economy going forward. So there's need for succession planning is increasing to assist employers with leveraging internal talent, ensuring people with the right skills are in the right positions, and minimizing negative effects for a smooth transition with retirements, transfers, or other organizational changes. Early today, Todd and I were having a conversation that these needs may even be more acute in rural Montana than in the urban portions of the state. But there's good news. And the good news is there's a tremendous amount of capital looking for a business home, and a very large portion of that capital is looking for a home specifically in Montana. The Montana Chamber of Commerce is particularly interested in keeping Montana businesses operating in the state and keeping good paying jobs and economic drivers in our communities. We are committed to promoting business transitions that maintain and grow businesses in Montana. With that, I'm very happy to introduce 2 of the region's top experts in transition planning, and I'm even happier to report that both are committed to keeping Montana businesses in the state of Montana. We've had a slight change of agenda today. Bill Van Canagan had a family situation and is unable to attend, so we've got a slight pivot. But please help me welcome James Thompson, a Butte America native, and Scott Hardman, both managing directors with Alexander Hutton.
Well, thank you. Appreciate everybody taking the time. I want to thank the Chamber. I am from Butte, America. I like to say that I grew up in Butte and I've got $10,000 worth of dental work to prove it. And, but I also lived in Billings and went to Lewis and Clark High and Billings Central. And I've been here in Montana working this succession planning issue for a number of years. It is real. You know, in the U.S. today, there are 7 million private companies with owners over 55. So it's estimated that in Montana, there are 10,000 companies. They might be small, but same issues, employees, tax base. So when we linked up with Todd and talked about what we see in our business, which we work on successful business transitions. And so we have a number of slides to go through. If we go to the first slide, the agenda is set. So why we're all here, we'll talk about specifically about 2 guarantees in life, who we are, why do we have any expertise that you should listen to us, private markets, capital markets update, the M&A process. My partner Scott Hardman, who's really been doing a lot of M&A for a lot of years, is going to get into the process, and then getting prepared for a transaction. I think that's the most important thing, is there's a number of advisors that are needed from a tax, accounting, legal, estate. There's a lot of folks. This is a huge, it's probably the biggest decision and the biggest moment when you turn your company into your retirement, or you make the transition to a child, or you sell the business to a general manager. It's a really, really important decision. And the advisors you have around you is very important. And I'd say that across the board, whether big companies or small. As I said, I'm from Montana, went to Gonzaga, went to University of Washington. I have a home over in the Big Hole, so I spend half my time here in Montana working with Montana companies. I've been an operator for half my life, so I've been a CEO and a CFO, and I've been in finance, investment banking, venture capital, so I've kind of been on both sides of the table. And what I would say is part of transition is having the capital to enable a successful transition. And there is a lot of capital out there today because of the returns that can be generated by private equity, private debt in private companies. But there are really 2 truths. That at some point, every company needs capital, whether you're getting a bank loan or bringing on an equity partner. And then, of course, every company, just like death and taxes, every company goes through a transition. But there are resources to have a successful transition, whether that's management buyouts, growth capital options, you want to buy your competitor, or you want to just take a few chips off the table. You know, maybe you're 50 and you think you got another 10 years. Maybe you'd want to just sell 50% of the business, or what we call indemnify the family, because in some instances this is significant capital, and there are resources out there that would enable you to partner with a financial buyer and get a second bite at the apple with that particular set of resources. You're able to grow the business, and the second bite of the apple is when you sell it all in sort of 5 to 6 years. So there are opportunities here, and right now the 2 truths post-COVID are it hasn't really changed. There's still a lot of capital out there. Our technology here. There's still a lot of capital out there. There is the strategics. Strategics are people that are in your business who are looking to expand to this region. They're still looking to buy versus build. We're working on a deal right now selling a company out of Seattle to a Toyota as an example. There's lots of private equity, private debt, family offices. If you do decide to take a few chips off the table, it's the cultural fit is really, really important. And I want to give an example of that in a real transaction. And really, COVID has had no impact on the importance of preparation. And there's a number of wonderful service providers in this state. Bill Van Cannigan would be one of them, but there are a number of great M&A attorneys, great accounting firms like Wipfli and AZ to do quality of earnings work, doing audits, doing tax planning, and then, of course, you also, I better talk fast, this just keeps happening to me, which I can do. I do want to talk about a couple of case studies. These are two Montana companies. If you know Pie out of Bozeman, that's Tom McMakin and his management team asked us whether we would help them raise the capital for a management buyout. So that's a founder who's selling the company to management. I would say that is a likely sale for a lot of the businesses in Montana. And Tom's business is a business services company and services clients all over the world from Bozeman, Montana, but has 85% repeat revenue. So once he gets a customer, he keeps a customer, which Capital loves that. Then he also has high EBITDA margins, so 30% of every revenue dollar, roughly, maybe a little lower than that, but puts in his pocket. Now that is a debt candidate. When you have that top line that's so consistent and the bottom line consistent, that's driven by the top line, that's a debt option. And I remember him saying, Scott and I we worked on that transaction a long time, but when we first brought it up, he said, well, you know, I've talked to all the banks in the Valley. And I thought to myself, now when you say the Valley, I think Silicon Valley. And he said, no, Gallatin Valley. And I said, well, these are not the traditional banks. There are debt sources out there, little higher interest. And we brought in 3 or 4 different folks and talked to them. And they got a term sheet with Calteus Capital out of Los Angeles. It was very competitive. But that's a business that was only doing about $2 million of EBITDA. These are not giant companies. This can happen at big companies and small. And I think that's one example. So that's a management buyout, which I think would be a lot of examples within the chamber. Dayspring Restoration, and by the way, I love both these companies. I fall in love with most of my clients. You get to know them. They're going through an important issue. You're holding their hand through the process. Dayspring is run by Mark Springer. We got to know him at the YPO. We made a similar presentation to the Montana chapter of YPO a couple years ago. He also had an aging partner that needed to be bought out according to the terms. And he kind of was tired of carrying him. He was doing all the work, and he was just kind of an inactive shareholder. And we went out to 36 parties. That's a home restoration business. And actually, I think Dayspring just bought a business here in Billings. But we went out to 36 parties and got 12 offers, which I was surprised. And he had very good legal assistance, great accounting. They had audited statements. And it, too, was only about a $2 million EBITDA business. And getting 12 offers for an all-Montana business was remarkable to me. It wasn't because we were great marketers. It was because Mark Springer is an awesome operator. And Dirk Conager, if you know them from Missoula, he's a former Washington Company's division CFO. He's their CFO. And we got to the final 4 of the best 4 of the 12, and we brought them to Bozeman. And they couldn't have been more different. Now, Mark was just planning to keep part of the business. And so the cultural fit was really important. And I'll never forget it. You know, I grew up in Butte. I'm pretty familiar with all kinds of sort of crazy folks. But remember, some guy from Houston shows up and he tells us that he arrived on a private plane. That was important to let everybody know. And then he sat down and complained that there was no Jack Daniels. This was only a wine and beer spot. And he pulled out his Copenhagen can and his special spit cup, puts it on the table, and he says, now, Mark, what do you want? And I thought to myself, well, Mark, meet your new boss. Needless to say, he did not choose that. He did choose the best price and the best structure and the best cultural fit, because you can get everybody competitive if you have the right cultural fit. But he now is partnered up with the Hunt family, who own the Kansas City Chiefs out of Dallas. Wonderful group of people. And, you know, private equity gets a lot of bad rap, but they did what they said they were going to do, and they stayed really consistent. So we're really pleased with those two transactions. We're working on a number of other transactions in the state with some really high quality operators, and we think the same outcome will also be the case. One of the debt advisory thing that we do come in and fix balance sheets. You know, the state, you have to think beyond the state chartered banks when you think about debt. There's so much capital out there. We've got people in Seattle saying, hey, we can see what you're doing out there in Idaho and Montana. We'd like to deploy capital. Can you show us some deals? And they might be, again, a little higher interest rate. They might take a little equity slug. But it enables owners to control their business after the transaction and keep over 51%. So just quickly, Alexander Hutton, 36 years, 220-ish transactions. We're closing 2 this week. They're both in Seattle. We work with companies sort of in the 1 million and up of EBITDA. We work with successful private companies. And one of the things about Montana, all Montana companies are even what I would call more rural opportunities, is your customers are really consistent and your employees are really sticky. And if you have those two things, outside capital really likes that. And I found with Mark Springer at Dayspring, they're the only game in town, and they're good at what they do. So we're part of a global organization, Oakland's, where we have folks like me in 40 offices, 60 offices in 40 countries. We get together twice a year. We talk about deals. And then every once in a while, somebody from Germany will buy a U.S. company, or somebody from the U.S. company will buy a Japanese company, and we work together on those transactions because culture and language is really important in the work that we do. And calling Tokyo from the big hole is not always that successful. We stack up against others. We do a lot of transactions. This is what your typical investment banker would do. He'd show you all the transactions he's done. He does that to remind you that on each one we learn. And as you do more, you get better at what you do. And we stack up against some of our competitors pretty well. Just the private capital market landscape. I think I'll be quick here because we want to hold some time for Q&A. But I think it's fair to say that over the last 10 years, there's been more and more capital from institutions. Those are your university endowments, your state pension funds, your insurance companies, who have pushed what was at the time, maybe 15, 20 years ago, sort of a cottage industry. They've pushed more money into venture capital, private equity, hedge funds, commodities, what we call alternative assets. That's what's happened because those asset classes are uncorrelated to public markets where most of their money is set. So they want to be invested in these companies. That's happening. So they're putting money into these funds at a record clip. The funds are doing very well. I think this is a 10 to 15 year run, and that means more capital for entrepreneurs to fund growth, to fund transitions. And that's an important successful transition, is making sure you have enough capital. But I think that is what's really driving up into the right slide like this, more capital, more deals. And to be honest with you, we tend to have the capital providers coming to us saying, you're an intermediary between the people who operate companies and the people who finance companies. Please show us opportunities. It used to be we would need them, then we would bring our client to them, but it's become so competitive that they're really the commodity, and you all, as operators, are where the magic happens. But it's important to make sure you get the right price, structure, and cultural fit. $1.5 trillion of dry powder. There's also the rise of the family office. I'm always reminded of William Randolph Hearst, who backed Marcus Daly and Butte back in 1870. Well, that's happening today just with other family offices. They don't have to be as big as Hearst. Some of them are $100 million family offices that are hiring people to buy private companies and own them forever. If you want to generate returns, don't sell companies, don't pay taxes, and that's sort of the friction. And so they're out looking for companies, and of course, with 7 million private companies with owners over 55, the opportunities are out there. And it's estimated that there's 10 trillion of family office capital that's out there. And of course, the private equity returns have been quite good. For the upper quartile of private equity, you're talking 20 to 25% returns. I saw last week that Harvard's endowment reported a 36% return in their endowment. Now, you have 50 billion and go up by 36%. That pays for a lot of buildings. M&A activity continues to grow. These are strategic and financial buyers. Scott's going to get into the difference between and what they're looking for in those deals, but obviously it's up and to the right. And in our lower middle market, this 1 million of EBITDA to 25 million of EBITDA, it also, most of the companies in our sandbox, which is Seattle to Billings, Montana to Denver over to San Francisco, most of those companies are not 50 million of EBITDA. Those private companies have even gone public or have been purchased. And most of what we do is in those smaller companies. We like small entrepreneurs and small company owners. We really enjoyed the quality of the entrepreneurs in this state in particular. But I guess I'm probably a little biased. But you're seeing the same thing. There's a great phenomenon that you're seeing here in Billings and certainly in Bozeman, this whole reverse migration. Well, that reverse migration is also happening with capital. They're saying, we don't really care. I had a founder of a company say, it's time for me to sell, but I don't want this company leaving Montana. And I said, well, I've been the president of the Montana ambassador in Seattle for 15 years, promoting Montana business to the Pacific Northwest economy. And I said, that's music to my ears, because that particular owner thought that was a community asset. And I said, that business is successful because of where it is. It's not, there are going to be buyers out there that will share your opinion because of the high quality of the workforce here in Montana. So, in conclusion, deal activity is robust. I think capital access will remain to be robust as well. I think that if you look at M&A as a growth engine, we've been doing this for 36 years, 220 transactions. I don't think that's going to slow down. In fact, we think it's going to accelerate with this many private companies. The baby boomers, for the first time, Gen Z is larger than the baby boomers, and it's driving the housing increase in prices because they're first-time home buyers. And the secondary and tertiary markets like the Rocky Mountain region will also be a big driver. So thank you for letting me tell my story. This stuff is kind of boring, but I'm going to introduce my partner, Scott Hardman.
Great. Well, let me add my word of thanks for having us over. Todd, congratulations on a successful meeting. It's great to be here in Billings. When James and I have worked together since back in the 90s, and when we started looking a few years ago at him coming back to the growth and merger and acquisition side of our firm, he said, I want to expand our focus back to my home state in Montana, because I think there's going to be some opportunities out there. And he likes to tell the story that I said, well, are there opportunities? And he said, well, I don't know. So he said he took his golf clubs and his fly rod and drove around the state for 3 weeks meeting with folks. Well, here we are, less than 2 years later, having closed 3 transactions here in Montana. And those are companies that are staying in Montana, that are well capitalized, ready for growth, and keeping those families that are employed here in Montana. And that's what's really something that excites us. the fact that we can help steward a process that brings along a company to be in position to be durable, to weather the storms up and down. And a lot of it simply has to do with that there's lots of capital out there, and there's not a lot of folks in this region that are aware of those capabilities and that capacity for capital to flow in to help Montana businesses grow. So we're going to dive down into a little bit about the M&A process, and you might be asking yourself, well, in talking about transition, why talk about M&A? Because when you talk about transition in a company, you're talking about a merger or an acquisition. You're talking about joining another business or part or all of that business being acquired by a financial entity. And that really is the two reasons or types of entities that will be involved in a transaction with a company. And you might ask, well, why do people do transactions? Why do they have a transition? And this is really important because as James started out, every business is going to go through a transition. You know, it's either going to happen when the owner gets carried out boots first, or hopefully when there's been a bit of forethought and planning and there's an opportunity to have an orderly transition and an orderly transaction and change of ownership. But you think about generational. Think about selling to the kids. And the reality is, when you do that, if you don't have a financial partner, it means you're putting all the risk of the value that's been built up by the current generation on the performance of the next generation. Or as my dad used to like to say to me, well, you never even took out the garbage when you were 15. How am I going to let you, well, you know how that sentence ends. So you have generational. There's capital available to help support generational transfer. There's capital available to help support management buyouts or buy-ins. There's capital available for growth. There's capital available to purchase a competitor to grow through what we call inorganic rather than organic means. Buy a competitor, grow that way. You know, one of the things that we're seeing more and more of is folks come in and say, well, I still have fire in my belly, I still really want to go, but recent history shows there's a lot of risk out there, and I would like to kind of de-risk my family's finances. And what we call taking some chips off the table. So a partial sale of the company. The current owners stay in operational control, they run the business, they have opportunity to grow the business, participate, but they don't have all the eggs in the basket of the business. And for our clients, it's undoubtedly the case that by far the largest financial transaction they'll ever have in their lives is the transaction as they transition a portion or all of their business. And then, of course, there's what oftentimes people think of as the only type of transaction, and that's a complete sale of the business. But notice that it's only one of many options when you think about a possible transition or transaction. So let's talk about the universe of potential partners in this. And it's strategics and financials. And strategics are what people often think about when they think about a transaction. It's a company. It's a company that's a competitor or a potential competitor. It's a company that has a strategic reason to do a transaction. And you'll see there that what strategics are usually looking at seeking 100% ownership. They execute a buyer strategy. They have a long-term focus. They integrate the operations. One of the key things about strategics are they're looking at this as a way to grow their business. They're looking for additional products or services that they can push down through their channels, and they're looking to be able to push their products or services down through the acquired company's channels. So the synergy is really important. What? Yeah. So, Tony, am I right that this is blinking off now and then? No.
That's the connection between here and this.
Yeah, it has nothing to do with us. Yep, great, good, thanks. So, there's, when you look at strategics, it's really for them, it's a make or buy question. Do we do this internally? Do we devote some money? Does a big company get a team going, put money into it, and try to build up that area within their business? Or do they go out and buy somebody that's already doing it? Alternatively, are financial investors, financial acquirers, private equity and family office that James mentioned. And they're doing this as a pure investment. There's no strategic fit in terms of what that company does and what the company being acquired or invested in does. And they almost always want under 100%. They take board control, but there's also minority investment. And they help with the management team to develop a strategy for growth. They look medium term because, of course, they have investors that they need to return funds to, so at some point there needs to be another transaction. They use debt financing. One of the advantages of the family office or private equity is there's more confidentiality in that. When you're talking to potential acquirers who are in your industry, there's risk. Even if people sign confidentiality agreements, there's potential of chatter. You know, when I was a CEO, people will always be coming in off the plant floor and say, "Hey, I hear we're for sale." And I said, "You live in America. Everything's for sale at the right price in America," you know. And but the reality is, those kind of rumors can be damaging. So there is a little bit of an advantage to the private equity and family office investors in that they don't have that strategic potential of breaching confidentiality. What drives these strategics? They're going to expand their products and channels, get stronger markets, accelerate growth, optimize their capital, and increase economies. As you know, a larger business can source from vendors at a cheaper price. A larger business gets a better deal. A larger business, if they have enough control in the market, can have a pretty strong say in the pricing in that market. All of those are reasons. You see down at the bottom there some of the folks that we've sold businesses to through the years. In our 36 years, and this week I think it's 219 and 220th deal we're closing. About half of we've done transactions with strategics, and half have been with financial investors. What do private equity and family office look at for? They look at the basic fundamentals of the business. They're looking more internal within the business rather than anything about how that business goes with their business, because they don't have one. The growth is a key element. The management team is key. Ability to put some debt on the business as well as putting equity in the business. And there has to be an exit strategy as they enter. You know, it's always the case that as you go into an investment, you always want to know, how might I get out of the investment? So they look at value differently. The financial or private equity views value just as the business is, on a cash flow basis. It's all standalone value. The operational improvements are a key element, and repositioning an improved market position is key. From the strategic side, it's more kind of on the microeconomics. And all that means is looking at how, when you put the business together, how do they operate? What are the synergies involved? What are some of the values that you can pick up? So sometimes it's the case that with strategics, you can get a better valuation than with the private equity because of that microeconomics. You see there at the bottom on the right side, that synergy premium and that strategic premium can add value and mean that you might get better valuation from a strategic than a private equity, but it varies by industry. So in a private equity transaction, what's it look like from a balance sheet? You know, when I used to teach finance to business owners, I used to joke, well, you know what the balance sheet is? It's that other financial statement that you never look at. Well, what's the capital structure look like in a PE transaction? And what's important? It's really important to, of course, look at the top line valuation, the enterprise value. It's important to look at the ownership percentage. It's important to look at the terms and the amount of debt that's being proposed, being put on the company. And by the way, prudent is in the eyes of the beholder. I've been doing this for decades, and I know that what is a comfortable amount of debt for someone else won't be comfortable. And so making sure that whoever you're partnering with has a similar view as you do on that question is really important, because a risk-return guts vary individual by individual. And finally, and this is really important, there's the question of fit. We always encourage as a team, we encourage our clients to think about a transaction as resting on a three-legged stool or a tripod. There has to be a strategic fit, a financial fit, and the personality and corporate cultures and values have to fit. We had a deal one time where there was a pretty significant difference between two different offers, these are both strategics, and it was a very successful Seattle company. But one of the companies was very much hierarchical. If you were a senior vice president, you had this many more square feet in your office than if you were just a vice president. And the vice president had this many more square feet than the directors. Our client was very much a collegial kind of business. Everybody called each other by their first name. It was very much a collegial business. And we had to sit down with our client and tell him, yes, they're offering more money, but you don't really fit with them. And we walked through that, and he said, and here now, 20 years later, he still reminds me of that conversation and said, boy, I'm so glad. He's long retired, but the company's still there and still part of that bigger business. But there was a good fit involved, and that was really important. So what does it actually look like when you do a transaction with a private equity? Oh, sorry, thanks. Here's an example, and this is for what's called a majority recapitalization. And all that means is moving around the capital within the company, bringing in some additional capital to get to an outcome that's desired. So let's assume $100 million. Most of our clients are under that or well under that, but it's easier to do the math with $100 million. So company might put $70 million of debt on, the equity investor puts $20 million in, and the equity from the business owner, they roll over 10% of the value. But notice something here. It's 10% of the value, 10 million, 100 million, but it's a third of the equity, 10 million plus 20 million is 30 million. So this is what can make these kind of transactions really attractive. The net to the business owner is they get $90 million. They get 90% of the value of the business, but still hold on to a third of the ownership on a go-forward basis. And you can imagine if you're someone who has a business and you really want to indemnify the family and you still got fire in your belly and you still want to be doing some things, that could be a pretty attractive way to move forward. It's also an opportunity when this happens. There's often some options and an option pool put in for the management team that don't have ownership. Or in this case, it could be that the business owner is multiple owners and they roll some of their ownership. And what that means is we were just doing a calculation this week with our client for this deal that closes Friday. It's a very, very profitable business, and he's holding on to a significant chunk. Well, the acquirer tends to distribute those out, anything that's not needed for capital growth. And so that means he's going to take a third of the dividends year to year, not just at the end when there's another transaction. So it's pretty attractive for our clients when they look at these majority recapitalization opportunities. There's also minority recapitalization, and that means keeping the majority of the business and just getting some capital in through a sale of part of the business. And in this case, you can see that the private equity is bringing $20 million in debt and $20 million in equity. So they're bringing in $40 million. The business owner is pulling some out of the business, but also leaving some in for growth and still owning 75% of the business. There's a lot of companies across America, and I'm sure here in Montana, because we've been dealing with them, where this could be a really attractive opportunity. Retain ownership, retain majority ownership, operational and board control, and indemnify the family, put some money aside, and get some money for growth. It can be a really winning combination. So how long does it take to do a transaction like this? If looking up here, this is a bit of an eye chart. It's a little small, sorry. But it's about 6 months. And by the way, we're going to send out this presentation to everybody that's attending, so you'll have all this information. And you'll be able to read some of the stuff that's smaller. But what you'll see here is a little work plan where the upper part is we and our team doing research and putting together the marketing materials, and at the same time looking at potential investors or acquirers. That's the bottom stream. And that comes together about 60 days out with our client approving the potential list to be contacted with a blind profile and a confidentiality agreement. And those that sign that and want to move forward, we then provide them a book, what we call the SIM, the Confidential Information Memorandum, that's a sales document about our client and what the goal is for the transaction. When you reach agreement on that, usually about 4 months into the process, you still got another 3 months to go, because then the lawyers go to work on the documentation and there's a due diligence process. Let's talk about getting ready for the transaction. What do you need to think about if you or folks you're talking with are thinking about a transaction? You need to think about timing as it relates to the ownership's personal goals. And let's just be really honest here. This is such a big decision that most business owners I know, and I know this was true for me when we had a company, you kind of dither on this question. You kind of defer it. It's kind of like, cleaning out the gutters or something. I mean, you got to do it, but, not this weekend, right? My wife and I just downsized, and one of the reasons we deferred moving out of a 5-bedroom house where we hadn't filled all 5 bedrooms in over 3 years was it was all the junk we had. Generations of junk in that big house. By the way, just a brief aside, my favorite new bumper sticker, it's not an empty nest until they get their shit out of your basement. But so we dithered on moving, and business owners, it's only natural. It's a big decision. What do I do about this? What about that? It's just, well, we'll think about that later. But the reality is, business owner every day is getting older. There's lots of reasons why to start working on it now, and to have a realistic look at the horizon and the financials is really important. The future, as it relates to the business, both the upside and downside risk. What about the management team? What about the customers? What about competitors? What's really happening strategically within the company? Current and future trends in the industry. A lot of folks look at it and they go, our industry is changing, and we need to update a lot of our capital equipment. We need to make major investment into our business. And as one guy said to me, he said, I own this company to take money out of it, not to put money back into it. And, so that kind of question is really an important one when you think about timing. And as we've all seen over the last couple of years, there's unanticipated events, what the economists call exogenous shocks. Things happen from outside that really can impact us. So thinking about timing and thinking about it sooner rather than later is really important. Here's a little chart that shows you how to think about the business when it's time. The x-axis, or the y-axis, sorry, is revenues and cash flow. X is time. So you can see down at the bottom there, it's premature. The company hasn't really started taking off yet. When it's going up the hill, that's a good time to sell. On the morning when you wake up and you go, business is going so great, why would I ever think about selling? It's not a bad time to start thinking about selling. Because one of the worst things, and James and I and our colleagues, one of the saddest conversations we can have is when someone comes in and it's the widow of the founder, the company's, flailing, things have plateaued, or someone comes in and they've lost their biggest customers, there's been a major change in the industry, and as things start flattening out, that's not good because, of course, any investor, any acquirer is buying the future. They're not buying the past. So when things are going well, is a time to think about a transaction. James mentioned team. Life's a team sport. I was struck by the fact that both of the guys from National Association of Manufacturers and the U.S. Chamber talked about the importance of relationships in life. And it's really important when you think about a transaction and think about doing something, it's getting a team together. And they need to be experienced advisors in mergers and acquisitions. You need to have an M&A advisor. One of the saddest things that can happen is for somebody, I had somebody call me up and offer to buy my business and I sold it to them. And then they come in afterwards and they say, yeah, I sold it for X, but people told me I should have looked around to see maybe I could get more. And you find out, they left millions of dollars on the table that would have gone to their family. It's kind of like going to an auction. You ever go to a cattle auction? Ever go to a charity auction? You don't get the best price if there's only one person raising the paddle, do you? You need to have a process. You need legal advice, and not necessarily the legal advice that got you to the point where you are now. You need specialized legal advice when it comes to transactions and estate planning. You need specialized tax and accounting, and you need wealth management. Because the person that's been handling your stock portfolio, your brokerage account, is probably, someone you should talk to, but you also ought to check to see what about people who do pure, actual wealth management. Because for most of our clients, they go to having, maybe a bit of money in the bank or in their portfolio to having tens of millions in the portfolio. And that's a game changer. And you need to think about wealth management. So think about that team. Think about a team. Life's a team sport. Getting a transition done is a team sport. In conclusion, two truths. Every company at some point needs capital. Every company at some point transition ownership. I hope you feel like this hour you've at least heard some good news, maybe a little bit better than some of the previous hour, that there really is capital out there to accomplish some things that companies want to do. And we'd be excited to be helpful, and we'd love to answer any questions you have. Comments, questions? Sure.
Thanks. My question is, I see it takes 6 months to close the deal, but in a perfect world, when would it be a good time for someone to come to you if they know they're going to close the business out? Is it 1 year, 2 years in advance to kind of position them to be a good balance sheet and income statement view? What's your rule of thumb?
It's often...
Here, you want,
we have...
is that one going to work?
I'm just going to turn that one on here. They turn off back.
Oh, thanks.
I think the answer is it depends. It certainly isn't the 6 months. The 6 months is what our process is, but I would say that we have dozens of conversations with folks who we just provide insights, and if we can be helpful to think about their options, but it's often 18 months, 24 months before a process. And some of the folks in this room have gone through transactions and have had different advisors, but I would say it's 18 to 24 months prior to a transaction.
I'm going to ask one here, as maybe some other folks are thinking of some, and you may or may not have the answer to this based on what side of the transaction that you're on, and it sounds like you work a lot of angles in this. I am curious if you hear in these mergers and acquisitions, especially from the acquiring business, any chatter or any even asides that they share about what they like about Montana's business climate and why they are acquiring this Montana business, especially if they're not from here, but also what reservations they might have about investing in a Montana business. Like what about Montana's business climate do some of these acquiring businesses like and don't like that you've heard of in your work?
James, why don't you do that?
Well, I think that obviously Montana has a lot going for it. The tax environment, the growth. What is it? It's one of the fastest growing states. You just added 10%, I think, over the last 18 months. And this state needs things as it grows. But I don't think the financial folks who partner with Montana companies don't view it as a Montana company. They just view it as a company. And I think, again, you got some great entrepreneurs in this state and really sticky labor. Reality is, if you're in Glendive, there's not a lot of other jobs to think about. And you're likely to have followed your mother or father into the business because they worked for the business too. We're seeing that Montana succession planning often is the general manager's daughter and son. And that's sticky labor, because in big markets like Seattle, people can go to work at lots of places. And I tell you, that's one of the biggest costs of most businesses is retaining and training talent, and just the talent cost itself. So I don't think it's necessarily a Montana. I think there's lots of people who have come to me and said, hey, I'd really like to buy a Montana company. And I think that's sort of, maybe they like fishing over here, playing golf or skiing. But when a lot of these folks are looking at some of these businesses, the word always comes back to durability. How durable is the business? And I think with some of the transactions we've worked on, they're durable businesses, whether they were here or anywhere else. And I think capital just seeks returns and great management teams.
I've got a question. James, when you and I first started talking, I think it was within a couple of weeks after I started at the Montana Chamber, one of the things that resonated with me, and that was in 2019, was your comment about the bull market that we've been in, the bull economy that we've had, and that while no one can predict a recession, right, it has an impact on these M&As and acquisitions. Can you talk a little bit about how a recession, in your experience, how that could affect transition planning for?
Yeah, I think you can look at two events, which was the bank collapse of 9/10. That knocked everybody on their heels. Maybe their revenue went down by 30%. Their cost didn't go down by 30%, because that's not quite how it works. They were probably 55 at the time, and they built all the way up and kind of got through into 2020, and pandemic hits. And they, a lot of business owners we talk to about transition say, to quote one, I thought we could support 4 or 5 families with this business. That's why I got into this business. And now the business is doing $20 million of revenue and a couple million of profit. And I never thought this business was going to be worth tens of millions of dollars. But I'm tired. And I think COVID has made us all think about our mortality in a different way. And I think that is going to accelerate. Because of that exogenous event that Scott talked about. What's the next exogenous event? And I think we kind of all whatever work you're in, have a different view of sort of your golden years.
Question in the back there.
Thanks. Hi there. I'm Courtney Kibble-White with Northern Broadcasting, a family-owned business. I'm curious what, if any, of your advice changes with the current federal dynamic of, perhaps step-up basis going away, a lot of potential changes for estate planning, legal challenges right now. So I'm curious if any of your advice, or maybe you have some predictions to give us some hope.
Yeah, well, it's definitely the case that this is a very busy M&A year, because lots of folks, combination of being tired coming out of COVID and looking at tax implications coming out of Washington. In Washington State, there's been, for the first time, a capital gains tax passed. It seems likely that it will not stand legal scrutiny, but at least that passed. And that's driven a lot of folks to say, gee, you start adding up a couple of, percentages increase from the federal level and add 7% on that. We've sure seen that impact folks in Washington State. I do think it just gets back to that idea of the team, because, for instance, James and our other colleagues and myself, we're not the ones that ask about tax impact. There's folks who are experts at that, who can really advise on that. We can advise about market. We can advise about possibilities. We can give you a valuation, some ideas. We can talk about what some options are. Because in the end, our job is really creating options where owners can look at it and say, gee, I could sell all of it to these couple offerers. I could sell part of it here. I could leave, I could stay, I could roll over some. All of those options are available. And that's where you want to have great tax advice, great wealth planning advice, great legal advice, as well as, not to be too modest, great M&A advice.
But I also think that, we started off this year where Biden was talking about doubling capital gains rate to 46. Now we're at, we're going to go from 21 back to the George W. Bush capital gains taxes. And it looks like there's going to be corporate income tax, minimum corporate income tax, and then a billionaire's tax of some type. So that's very fluid right now. And I would stay focused on driving a durable business and not being driven by selling a business because the tax rates are going up. That may be the right thing to do, but it's funny, after June, we heard all that in the first half of this year, and then June happened, and I think we added more clients in the second half of this year, and people are saying, it's just time, it's time to make this transition, and we need to plan, and taxes will be what they will be.
Yeah, and I would say, I agree with that 100%. I would say that most of our clients come in, and for them, they're just aware that they've run the race, and maybe it's time to pass the baton to someone else who can take the company to the next level. And that might be an investment group backing the management team. It might be a strategic that can make this a division. And then we also have folks who these last couple of years have kind of made them think, I want to take some chips off the table and make sure that whatever happens, my family is taken care of.
We got another one right here.
Jan Rouse, Northwestern Energy. My question is, you're seeing an uptick in your business in the last year to 18 months, and probably a lot due to COVID, but are you seeing the difficulties in finding people that want to invest capital due to shortages in employees, businesses that are unable to meet the demands because of supply issues? How does that affect your business?
Go ahead. Well, I think that yes, we're busy, but I think and the whole ecosystem is busy. In terms of some of the day-to-day struggles of getting access to talent and because there has been people during COVID who have had COVID tailwinds. The two transactions I talked about, everybody was home breaking their toilets, so it was a pretty good business for some of the plumbers in the world, or the fires that you had here recently for Dayspring. Pi is a virtual company that does virtual business development for professional services firms. Well, nobody was going to conferences during COVID, so everything went virtual, and their business blew up. And so I think, though, I think that the attraction of talent, I think Pi has doubled their headcount through the time we worked with them in Bozeman. And I think, we have to be, as a state, thinking about sort of workforce training and how we do that, how we tie in with the university systems to do that, so that we address it on our own. It's not going to be people moving in perhaps from other states. We have to address it on our own. But I will say just one other comment about Montana businesses and making sure we keep Montana's tax base and our way of life protected. I just want to say this is an easy sell. When you show a great Montana company to a capital source, it's an easy sell. And I think one of the greatest strengths and greatest weaknesses of Montanans is you're somewhat you don't pat yourself up on the back enough, because there's great companies in this state.
Let me just add to that and say, in industry by industry is being impacted differently by COVID, and then coming out of COVID, the sudden restart, back up in supply chains, the capital planning that went into things like the foundries making chips, and now we're short of chips, all those questions. And for business owners within an industry, everybody else in your industry is probably dealing with that very same question and all those same challenges. So as investors look at an industry, and if they want to invest into a certain industry, they're going to have to deal with the reality of that industry at this point in time. And so the question of, if supply chain's a problem, workforce is a problem, it's always going to be the case that doing a great job of putting the story of the company out there vis-a-vis its competitors within that industry, with its peer group, you can still do good transactions, even when there's been challenges.
I know a private equity manager over in Seattle that sold his business, and the acquirer came to them, and it was a public company, and they said, we'd like to buy the business. And he said, well, it's not for sale because it's a terrible time to sell your business. And because it was right in the middle of COVID, it was a manufacturing company, everybody was at home, and they said, that's fine. We will value it on 2019's results, not 2020. Yeah. And that was about a $70 million transaction. And so the acquirers are out there. That's a strategic, but the acquirers are out there. We will get through these supply chain challenges. Maybe we'll have a stronger manufacturing base in the U.S. as a result, but you can't just stop an economy and expect that the restart is going to be that easy. So we're going to have to all struggle with it, but it will work itself out because of simply supply and demand.
We'll do one last question over here. Thanks again, gentlemen.
Thank you. My name is Mike Spreadbury. I'm in transportation, a limousine company. My question to you guys is, how do we get top dollar for our businesses? There's like a big trend for a lot of, say, like the film industry to come in and spend more money. It seems like we can be on an uptrend. How do we situate ourselves? You talked about how investors are trying to buy into the future. I see a very good future for companies here, so I'm just trying to ask how we situate ourselves to take advantage of that upswing.
Well, I think that valuations of businesses, or what you say top dollar, are driven back to the durability concept. How durable is the business? And having run a business myself and raised a lot of capital from a lot of different sources for the business I ran, it wasn't about what I'm going to do, it's what I've done. And that's what we call trailing 12 months. They look back over the last 12 months. And so, because it's a lot more powerful showing them what you did as opposed to what you're going to do. And that makes for a much more healthy negotiation around top dollar.
I would add to that a good growing business is always going to be attractive. And so being able to make sure that you have the financial statements in good shape, that you have an accounting, it's important, I think, to have outside accounting help so that the potential acquirers have some faith in the numbers. I think it's important that you be able to show that there's a team that's running the business. Even a small company, there's a team that's in leadership. The worst possible organizational structure for a business, for any business, and especially if you're going to do a transaction, is one where a guy described to me, he said, well, there's me, and then there's the help. And I said, well, the problem with that is we call that the rake organizational structure. It comes down and just a bunch of teeth at the bottom. I said, so you're going to sell, and then there's going to be the help left, because no one's going to believe that you're going to still have the same fire in your belly after the transaction as before it, because he wanted to sell 100%. And I said, so how's that work? So think about getting the financials in good shape, good financial reporting, growing the top line, but hopefully the bottom line is growing slightly faster because of having increased margins and having a team that a potential acquirer investor could look at, and all of those things reduce risk, and if you reduce risk, you raise value and get, as you said, top dollar. So thanks a lot. We really appreciate the chance to be with you.
I think you see it's like, these are kind of the confidence men, right? I mean, these are the guys that, as I've got to know James and Scott, as they've stomped around Montana and looking for places to invest, that I've increased my confidence in them. And I think you got a sense of that. And I was over my head early on when I started at the Montana Chamber of Commerce. And like I said, James was one of the first people to stop in and see me, and he was talking about all the transition needs in a state like Montana, and a little bit of it sunk in, not very much of it. But as time has gone on, I've come to appreciate the importance that proper transition planning, particularly for a state like Montana, where we are as diverse of an economy as we are, and as rural and urban as we are, and how important it is that if we want to grow this economy beyond the economy that we've had and get us to an economy that we deserve, we've got to have that proper transition planning and keep Montana businesses in Montana. And that's why we're happy to partner with Scott and James, and happy to have them in Montana and their dedication to keeping Montana businesses in Montana hands. So with that, thanks again. Appreciate it. Great information. We're scheduled now to take a little break until 3. We've got some refreshments set up next door. We've got a little trade show going on there. Make sure you go over there and introduce yourself to folks you might not recognize, and get a little break, and we'll be back here at 3 o'clock. Welcome back. As part of our effort to focus on manufacturing and the Montana economy, we wanted to bring in Brigitte to talk a little bit about what's going on from a global perspective. And one of the statistics that jumped out to us as we started preparing for this was that in 2019, we exported $1.7 billion in goods from the state of Montana. It's a significant component of our economy, even though we may not see it. And it's everything from coal to technology to dog chewy toys. So there's a lot that we manufacture in Montana. There's a lot that we are in the middle of here that goes into other world markets. And Brigitte is here to talk to us a little bit about what the international trade market looks like. And it's a central part of what the Montana World Trade Center does as far as their mission is concerned. So I'd like to introduce to you the Executive Director, Brigitte Miranda Freire, to provide some insight on the Montana International Trade and Investment Portfolio. Brigitte.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Thanks to you brave souls who have been sitting all day and will join us now. Appreciate it. So who's ready for a 102 PowerPoint slide presentation on trade stats? All right. With a content quiz at the end? No, we're not going to do that. I like you all too much. So instead, what we're going to do today is take a little bit of time to run through some of the numbers just to give you some baseline information. And then you're going to hear from these fine people beside me here who are engaged in the business of international trade every day. Starting jokes aside, from pandemics, supply chain disruptions to trade wars, I think it's safe to say that everyday Montanans are probably more aware than ever before about how things that are happening on the other side of the world impact them, and how Montana's international trade portfolio actually impacts them. And so our objective with the time that we have together today is to kind of drill down on that a little bit and create a dialogue that will help us to grow that portfolio in a manner that grows jobs and capital investment in Montana. Yeah? All right. So let's see here. I am going to introduce these fine women in just a moment here, but we're going to run through about 4 or 5 minutes of information here. So again, you heard my name, Brigitte. You can call me B too, and I'm with the Montana World Trade Center. There are about 300 World Trade Centers in 100 countries around the globe. This one happens to be housed at the University of Montana, Missoula, Montana, but we serve the entire state. I have a distributed workforce. So right now I've got people in Helena, Billings, Kalispell, and somebody part-time in Butte right now. Our mission is to grow Montana's international trade portfolio, and we do that through statewide initiatives, such as our work in leading Montana's foreign direct investment strategy, direct technical assistance to businesses, and also training. So you can look us up at mwtc.org, and thanks again to our partners at the Chamber. Okay, so, I don't know what's supposed to be up there right now, but if you can envision it, I've got this cool slide that I put together. Oh, that one. Time together today, we're going to look at those stats, and then we're going to break it down. First, we're going to look at exports, then the imports, and then we're going to spend a little bit of time looking at FDI. Then we'll get to talk with these folks here. All right. I know that this is tiny and the resolution is kind of poor here, but here's Montana's export story by the numbers. You can see that total annual exports from the state were down in 2020, no surprise. That's the last full year. But we do see that the August year-to-date numbers are up by 48% over the 2020 year-to-date export numbers. Well, you probably can't see, but I'll tell you that those top categories there, extractive industries predominate, right? So those are the largest categories of our exports. But be careful. Commodity ag sometimes gets lost in our trade stats. By the way, who knows why? Anybody know why that happens? Why doesn't Montana get credit for all of our ag? Oh. What's that? Well, those trade stats, unless you get really, really, really wonky about it, they track where the product leaves the United States, right? So we've got a lot of commodity ag that's, aggregated here, put on a rail car or something, and then ultimately departs from somewhere like Seattle. So just FYI. So be careful when you're looking at those stats. The other reason to be careful when you're looking at our export stats, you know what else is in here? Service exports. Service exports. So everything from our cloud computing firms that we're growing, quite a number of them in the state, to technical consultancy that's delivered to clients overseas, to things like wildland firefighting. Yep, those Montana-based companies, they export, and they export a service. None of that is there. Okay, here are the numbers on the import side. So this is what we see for Montana. Again, if we look at the last full year of data, 2020, no surprise, we see that total imports were down, just like exports. Why? Come on, this is not a hard one. COVID ruins everything, right? COVID. Sure, the pandemic really shook up supply chains and, demand leveled off or decreased. And the U.S. levied some significant tariffs on goods that were coming in from China and the EU, if y'all remember that. I bet you do, because you're part of the chamber. All right. Key takeaway here, though, is that Montana imports are still far more than our exports, billions more. So they're about $4 billion on imports, which you probably can't see on this poor resolution slide. And I think it was like 1.7 on the export side. So of note, most of those imports, though, before you get too concerned about that, are attributable to this harmonized tariff schedule classification. Ooh, now I'm getting really wonky. HS code 27, which is at the top of the screen here. And that's actually like mineral, fuel, oil. Most of that is coming from Canada, and it's being processed here in Montana. You've got a couple of those refineries right here in Billings. So maybe that makes a little bit more sense to you. So where in the world are we selling product to, and where's it coming to us from? Well, that's what this slide is meant to show. So you can see there's actually quite a bit of overlap here. There's two-way trade on the import and export fronts, and many of the same countries, countries are on both sides of this equation. So you'll see Canada, China, Mexico, Japan, and Taiwan are both well represented on these slides. What's our number one export market and our number one import market by far in Montana? What country? Yes, brave woman, yes? Canada. You are absolutely right. I will buy you a beer. All right. Okay, now we're going to look at foreign direct investment in Montana. Who knows what FDI is? The investment guys can't say. All right. Oh, is it Marcel back there? Oh, excellent. Enlighten our group. Yes. So, and FDI, as Marcel just clued you into there, it actually can be in the form of equity investment or greenfield development. NWTC maps FDI in our state. It's actually harder than you might think it is to do so because those equity placements aren't always public information. So most of this information we've gathered by getting around the state and meeting with those businesses or talking with people like you who have pointed out that, hey, this exists in our state. So on our website, if you're interested, you can check out that cool dynamic map. I wanted just to point this out. So Select USA is a U.S. Department of Commerce, federal U.S. Department, well, obviously, Department of Commerce entity, and they track FDI, at least they track the greenfield development part of FDI in our state. And you can see that from 2011 to 2021, they're showing only 10 projects in Montana that are FDI related, so that's not too very many. But even so, they're attributing it that our state has over 9,500 total jobs that are attributable to FDI. Interesting. And also, there is more equity investment in our state, as you saw from the map there. All right. Here's some of the industry-specific FDI placements here in Montana, just to kind of give you a flavor of what we're talking about. Pasta Montana is a pretty well-known one over in Great Falls. GlaxoSmithKline, that's a UK-based firm. And they're in Hamilton, Montana, and part of the bioscience cluster it's thriving in our state right now. And then just an example from Bozeman, Photonics and Optics, Bridger Photonics. Oh, I think I forgot one slide in there, but that's all right. And if any of you all are interested in learning more about FDI in our state and what that looks like, please visit our website for that. Okay, so now, patiently waiting is our fabulous panel that we have next to us, because you all do not want to listen to me for the next, 35 minutes or so. So I brought in a team of people that are going to share their stories. First to my left here, we have actually Holly Anderson with Woods Power Grip. They're out of Laurel, Montana, and Holly focuses on technical assistance and training for Woods Power Grip. Thanks. Thank you. And next to her is Diana Cagle with Tow Haul. They're out of Belgrade, Montana, and Diana is the shipping manager with Tow Haul. So she didn't just hear about shipping issues during COVID, she lived them. She lives to tell. Nancy Schlepp, she's VP of Communications with Sandfire USA, and they've got the Black Butte Copper Mine in White Sulphur Springs. And Heather McDowell. Hey, Heather. She's VP Legal, Environmental, and Government Affairs for the U.S. region for Sibanye-Stillwater. They, of course, have the Stillwater and East Boulder mines, which I think are about 85 miles southwest of Billings. So thank you. All right, was I close? Okay, all right. Google didn't fail me then. So when I was thinking about the composition of this panel, I wanted to have exporting firms that may engage in both exporting and importing, and I wanted to have some examples of FDI. So that's what we have up on the stage here with us today. All right. So the way I thought it would make the most sense to do this is we'll kind of have 3 levels of questions. We'll have those high-level view of what's going on, and then I want to drill down a little bit and get into the anecdotes, and that's the juicy stuff that hopefully will keep you all very awake and alert and excited about this. And then the predictions and insights, right? We'll get to that. All right, so let's start with the exporter side of our panel here. And so I'll just go ahead and start with Woods Power Grip first. And Holly, I was hoping, and I'll remind you if you forget any of this, but just real quick, tell us, what do you produce? How long have you been in Montana? How many employees do you have? Tell us a little bit of information.
Sure, thank you. We manufacture vacuum lifting equipment, and essentially what that means is think of large industrial suction cups. Anything that can help lift a solid surface. Okay. I thought I was already eating it, but apparently I wasn't close enough. We manufacture tools for materials handling, so glass, stone, insulated metal panels, anything non-porous our product can attach to. So it's a tool designed to help with ergonomics and labor pool. We are located in Laurel, as mentioned earlier, and we have about 134 employees with 9 openings. So this is the shameless plug for if you know anybody. Haha, everybody knows somebody right now looking for a job, right? Or at least everyone needs workers. We do have about 9 positions available that we're looking to fill.
Excellent, thank you. This is now off, but that's all right. I'm a very loud person when I need to be. So let's just go over to Diana then, and same question for you, real quick. Give us the overview.
The overview. I guess.
What you do.
Okay.
What does it should say that you do here? Let's start that. Okay. How
Gotcha.
many employees do you have? How long have you been doing business?
Sorry about that. I had a brain cramp. So my name is Diana Cagle. I'm the shipping manager at Tow-Haul. Tow-Haul, we manufacture large off-road lowboy trailers that are used in mining equipment. So what we do is we're working in 26 countries. And I don't know what else you wanted to say. We've been doing this since 1990. We currently have 72 employees, possibly 73. I'm not exactly sure on that number today, but.
Excellent. Thanks for your contribution. And so we're going to jump over to our FDI people real quick here. And so we'll start out with Nancy. And, your project is kind of just getting off the ground here. But, what will you be producing? Tell us that, please. And tell us a little bit about what your vision is for the number of employees that you'll have there, and what your estimated capital investment in Montana might be.
Sure. Thanks, Brigitte. So thanks for having us here today. We have permitted the first copper mine in Montana in 40 years, and we will be an underground project that will produce a copper concentrate at 3% copper, which in the copper world, that's the second highest grade project in the world under development right now. So really high grade copper. The deposit that we will be in construction with soon in phase 2, probably within the next year, if COVID cooperates, will take about $300 million to build. And overall, with the amount of copper that we have, this is about a $2 billion project. And there is a second deposit that we have found that could be permitted that will possibly add another 5 to 7 years to the project. So the total life of the mine right now sits at a little over 20 years when you consider construction and reclamation. And what else have I missed? Oh, our workforce, right now we're at 24 employees, and when we're in production we'll be at around 240 employees, and we think that about half of those will be from our local community, and the other 120 will be from about a surrounding 100-mile radius. So that's what we're looking at right now, and we're really excited that we're building the mine for the first time ever to hopefully have 40% women workforce. This being a modern mine with toggle switches, and there's nothing that a woman can't do with this mine, and so that's our goal, and right now we sit at 45% women.
I think I can do that whistle because I'm also a woman. Yeah. I think so. I don't know. Western women, we get shit done, right? Okay. Next then, let's go to Heather. Hey, Heather, thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me. So I'm going to start with a statistic other than our percentage of women employed. If everyone will humor me, it is not 45%, but we are working on it. So we are by legal entity, Stillwater Mining Company, just like we've been since 1986. We now have a South African parent. We're Savani Stillwater. We have about 85,000 global employees, about 2,000 of those, just a little bit under here in Montana, operating our East Boulder and our Stillwater mines and our metallurgical complex in Columbus. So we mine palladium and platinum. We are the only about over 3% of Montana's total economic output, and the scary part about that is that it all goes out via 5-gallon buckets from our nut complex in Columbus, so via an unnamed carrier. So that's our connection to the foreign piece. Again, we are not as mechanized as we would like to be, so we're really working on the diversity and inclusion piece as well. But I do, love to sit next to Nancy and listen to those numbers because it gives me hope. So we're trying as well.
Sounds good. So actually, let me ask you, so where the inputs that you're pulling out of the ground, where are those being sold predominantly? I think not outside the U.S. Interesting.
No, so we have two customers. We sell to Tiffany. Their platinum jewelry comes from us, and that's important to them from a sustainability and a responsible sourcing standpoint. So if you own Tiffany platinum jewelry, it's from the Stillwater and East Boulder mines. And then we also sell primarily to Johnson Matthey, who makes catalytic converters. So everything that comes out of our mines and from our recycle operations goes to either catalytic converters or to Tiffany jewelry. So then from there on out, a lot of those products are obviously exported, especially on the catalytic converter side. So palladium is used for gas catalytic converters, and platinum is used for diesel. So sort of figure how all those would fit in with Dieselgate and just the various markets and preferences internationally.
Okay, thanks. So I'm actually going to continue with where in the world do you sell your products? And so we're going to skip you. Well, we'll come back to you, Nancy, on this because I'm curious where you anticipate selling. Well, all right, tell us. Let's not keep people waiting. Where do you anticipate you'll sell these inputs that you're pulling out of the ground?
Thank you. So there are not a lot of smelters left in North America. So most copper smelters in North America are usually at capacity, and there's a good chance that this will be going overseas. As you see in Asia, a lot of zero-emission smelters being built every year. And so our product we've already had visitors and buyers come visit from both Japan and South Korea that are interested in our project if there's not smelter capacity here. I'd also mention that our major investor at 86% is an Australian company named Sandfire Resources, and they have copper projects in Australia, Botswana, and Spain, and our project. So mining, as Heather has mentioned, is definitely a worldwide product.
And so, down the chain a little bit further, we talked about Tiffany rings being created. Where does your product go?
Our product will probably go overseas, and then it will be smelted into usable copper and be sent back to the U.S. So that is usually what happens. What copper is being used in right now is mostly renewable products. Every windmill you see has 4 tons of copper in it. Solar systems, electric cars have 4 times the amount of copper as a regular car. And then the other part that's being used a lot is you see third world countries becoming second world countries. So I'll use India as an example. What's the first thing you want? You want refrigeration, which takes a lot of electrical wiring. So those are the things driving the copper market worldwide.
Isn't it interesting how we absolutely have to tie our extractive industries to sustainability also, right? Okay, great, thank you. So let's see here. How about Diana? Where in the world are you guys selling your product?
Well, as I said, we're in 26 countries. Right now, we're kind of concentrating on Australia and Brazil in the next couple of years. But we do have a pretty intensive service department and production line there. So we are servicing 300 units that are already operating throughout the world. So we're still selling small crates and pallets to our existing customers for planned maintenance. But the newer units are kind of going to South America and Australia primarily.
And just to make sure that our group here has the proper perspective, how big are these things that you're selling?
Okay, so a 450-ton unit weighs about 500,000 pounds. They go out in modules. The longest piece is about 80 feet long, weighs about 90,000 pounds. They're all over-dimensional pieces. There's of a 450-ton unit, there's only 2 legal loads. All the rest are oversized loads.
So we're talking about, it's not a tiny little thing. It's quite large.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
11. Yeah.
Oh, right. Good math. Fill us in. Where are you selling your product?
Sure. A primary chunk of our business is domestic, but from an export standpoint, we do sell through a distribution network, and our distributors are located, I know I'll miss a few, but they are primarily located in the UK, Germany, Denmark, Australia, and then we do have, from there, obviously the product itself will trickle down to other regions surrounding those particular distributors. We also do have a small network of distributors in the Middle East as well, Israel, and trying to get into Brazil as well.
Okay. How are you approaching that, or how have you approached that expansion, just out of curiosity?
Carefully.
Yeah.
It's tricky because the import taxes are very high, and also our product being one that is really geared and heavily marketed as a safety tool. In countries like Brazil, they don't have governing bodies that are on job sites and making sure that people are lifting safely. So it's a little tricky to get the buy-in from the safety standpoint that, hey, life is valuable, let's not throw out your back or lose an appendage.
Right.
And so once we can kind of tackle those sorts of buy-ins, it hopefully will become a bit easier as time progresses.
Interesting. So I want to actually learn a little bit about the importing you do. I think you do a little bit of importing for inputs for the products that you make.
It's pretty small in comparison. We do import a lot of our plastics. For example, our handheld products, which vary from 8 to 10 inches in diameter of a vacuum cup. Those will all have their own cases that accompany the tool. And so items like that we'll import in, as well as some of our casting materials that are actually fabricated into the rubber products that we make. So when you look at it in terms of numbers, from an export standpoint, we're probably around 16, 17 million, whereas the imports coming in are probably more in this 600,000-ish range. So it's a pretty stark difference between what's going out dollar-wise versus what we bring in.
Sure. But it's not uncommon that manufacturers in Montana actually do need to secure some of their inputs, some of their component parts from abroad. It is what it is. I don't even know. Fun fact about me, I can't see kind of past this table, so you're all sort of various versions of blurry. Do we have any manufacturers left in the room? I see Tom. I don't know if you guys, do you import any of your inputs? I don't know.
Not really.
Okay. Great. Okay. Well, all right. So thanks for sharing on that, and I appreciate the perspective of your exports relative to your imports. We have a number of importers in this state that are almost entirely dependent on imports for their business model, and they're bringing in finished consumer product. I don't have any of them represented up on the panel here today, but there are definitely some names you'd recognize. Okay, so let's go down here. Actually, Diana. Since I mentioned in the intro that you were in charge of shipping, it's safe to say that, executing international transactions, there's always a level of complexity that goes along with it. And that said, the pandemic certainly took that to a whole new level. And I'm wondering if you could actually just comment, to give this a little bit more flavor, this panel, comment on one impact, one supply chain disruption, maybe even as it might have related to moving freight, something that impacted your business recently.
Okay, so I'll tell you about when the first inkling that it was really going to be a problem for us. Right around March 20th of 2019, I had a container I was getting picked up in Finland to be brought to the United States. They had a decent rate. It was not a big deal. There was then like 3 days later, the rate doubled. Then within 10 days, that rate was triple. So because of our kind of history and knowing a lot about ocean shipments, I called a freight forwarder that I know really well. If you guys ever need her information, I'll be happy to share that with you. She had told me that once the pandemic hit, the ships were sitting too high in the water, which is very dangerous. Those container vessels are made to sit very low in the water. So they took them all out of service, a lot of them. They were kind of idled. They were docked. So then the availability became lower than what you thought it would be. I was surprised by that. I didn't know, but we ended up having to pay that, or the customer was the X-Works situation. They ended up paying triple the rate that they had planned for, their budget. So that was where it was then. Now you're seeing the supply chain taking a credible amount of time to get something somewhere. I just shipped a unit to Australia on August 16th. It was supposed to be arriving on October 4th. It went from the Port of Houston down through the Panama Canal, transshipped and putting on a roll-on, roll-off, sent to Fremantle, which is up by Perth. That unit, there's now labor disputes, and you're going to see them everywhere. This is not just here in the United States. It's across the world. But the steam line is in an argument with the port, so the port declined their ship. So our trailer got sent down to Melbourne. Now it got offloaded onto the dock, sitting for a couple more weeks, and now there's a different vessel it's a smaller vessel. It's owned by an Australian company. It's called a coastal ship. So in two separate loads, it will be brought up to Perth that direction. So now, then you're thinking about how do you protect your equipment so it doesn't rust? Well, the protectant that we use is only guaranteed for a little bit less than 60 days. And it's not arrived yet. It's probably going to be first or second week of November when it arrives. We have no idea what kind of damage it will sustain, and it is out of our control. So,
talk about exogenous events. Yeah, that's rough. And I think I heard you mention in there that terms of sale were X-Works.
Yeah.
Did you say that?
It is. But still, your name's on the side.
Yeah.
You have to.
Sure. Well, and for those of you out there that may not be super well versed in Incoterms, what she's talking about there is that X-Works term of sale is basically, we'll make it available at our place, and then after that, it's up to you, buyer, to take care of everything at your expense and at your risk. So even though they've tried to mitigate their potential exposure there, I mean, she's right. You're wanting a long-term relationship with this client. It's their name on the side. But the silver lining is that at least all that isn't happening, and you have to pay extra money to deal with it, right?
Sure.
So,
yeah.
All right. Well, thanks for sharing that. And really, it's like people like Diana that are working every day to try to just solve the Rubik's Cube of the day to try to actually get these transactions consummated. Okay, great. So actually, I didn't get a chance, this one's for you, but I didn't get a chance to visit with you about. So I was just wondering, and maybe I'll open up to both of you if you didn't have a comment on it. Is there a time when you gained an insight about your product that was being sold in a foreign market that actually helped you to perhaps even sell more product in the United States or improve your product? I'm just curious. That does happen. Did it happen for you?
I can think of one example, and
Sure.
it wasn't so much a product change as it was a product developed.
Yeah.
Overseas, I had mentioned previously that one of the industries that our product can work well in is the insulated metal panel market. And for those of you who may not know what that is, an insulated metal panel is essentially when you're constructing a building, rather than having to put up the skeleton of the building and then put in the insulation and the interior, whether it's drywall or particle board or whatever the case may be, and then the exterior skin, it's all in one nice, neat bundled package. So an insulated metal panel has your exterior skin, the insulation for the building, and then your interior skin. And that was something that's a product, a building envelope that's very common in overseas. In fact, one of the panel manufacturers had once told us that it was probably about 80% of the buildings that go up over there are with insulated metal panels versus traditional building materials, whereas here in the States, it's flipped. It's more 20-80, where insulated metal panels are really coming on in the States, but we don't see it used as a common method of building like we do overseas. So we were able to, with that customer, develop a tool that would work well for them in the market as it were overseas, but then also kind of put us ahead of the curve here in the States and be able to kind of get our foot in the door, so to speak, as this building method becomes more popular, and try to create some alliances or partnerships is probably the better word, with some of those panel manufacturers so that we can be on the cusp of that as material prices continue to climb over here. We may see that shift become more prevalent and the use of that building envelope much more common. So it kind of put us a little bit ahead of the curve.
Oh, excellent. One of the reasons I wanted to bring that up is because we're spending a fair amount of time talking about pain points here in doing business internationally, but there is ultimately a reason why businesses do it, right? I mean, you want to be diversifying your customer base to help, you ride out the situations like we've just had recently. You do glean insights from your customers in other markets in terms of how they're utilizing it, or that may lead to other opportunities, even for you in your domestic market. It makes you a better company overall, I think. And there's all kinds of stats about how businesses that are engaged in exporting, importing, they actually are able to, they're stronger firms that are able to pay their employees better. So we like engagement in international trade. So thanks for sharing that story. I want to shift gears. I want to go over to the FDI side of our panel now and actually talk with Nancy and Holly a little bit. We talked a little bit, I talked at the beginning here about existing investment in Montana, but we haven't talked at all, for example, and I guess I'll start at the end of the panel there. We haven't talked at all about, for example, Siboney's decision to make an investment in Montana. So I'd like if you could just share a little bit more about that decision.
Yeah, for sure. So Siboney started out of gold. It essentially spun off gold assets, very, very challenged assets. We still have those assets. We operate those assets. They employ about 60,000 people. And it is, they're very low grade. We obviously talking different elements here, but in Montana, we actually have materials in our tailings impoundments that are higher grade than what they're mining in South Africa. But when you're looking at real unemployment of well over 50%, being able to keep those businesses going. So Neil Ferdinand, our CEO, started off with those very challenged assets. And it was clear, they had to go with something, right? They weren't going to make it as their only sibling. So they did a series of platinum transactions in South Africa. There's an area around Rustenburg, which is the platinum belt, and got a couple different platinum mines put together there. And then the next leg of the stool was to do the Stillwater acquisition. And I think that was really just needing a flagship store, needing a going concern, needing sort of a guaranteed high grade, high output. And so that deal for Stillwater Mining Company, which was independently publicly traded, listed on the NYSE from here in Montana, and then was sold to Siboney, creating the Siboney Stillwater Company. That was in May of 2017. And it really was a very, very critical asset. And subsequent to us here in Montana, we've also acquired Lawman, which is platinum entity in South Africa, but has platinum refining capabilities. So now we can go all the way from its precious metals refining capabilities. Here in the U.S., we just have a smelter and a base metals refinery, so we are refining out the base metals, copper, nickel, et cetera, and we don't actually get to send it off for precious metals refining. But that's really how it happened to get this all put together, and it really works well. If you follow the news now, we're really on the beat for battery metals. So we've done a deal in Finland, small company, another nickel processing company in France, and then together? Is it all these siblings, precious metals, elements will all, I think the markets do tend to follow one another, and they tend to really complement each other really well. I think we've really benefited from very, very high vanadium prices recently. Rhodium prices have been just ridiculously, they've dropped off a little bit now, but rhodium is about 6% of what we mine altogether, mostly in South Africa, and for a while it was like 26% of our EBITDA. So it's just, I think, great to have this really good mix, and that was really the strategy of how we came to be, that we needed a gold complement.
Thank you. This is really interesting. So Nancy, I know that you're just to the point of getting operations off the ground, and you have been a dedicated servant in that regard. I mean, can you talk to us a little bit about some of the challenges that you've faced in getting to this point? And I know that you've overcome many. I'm just curious.
Sure, happy to share. There is a rich, great mining history in Montana, but there's also legacy issues in Montana and across the U.S. And so a lot of our hurdles were public perception, not knowing how much the mining industry has changed and how modern the mining industry is now compared to even 50 years ago. And so there was a huge perception hurdle to cross, and truthfully, we will be one of the most environmentally friendly mines worldwide now. And our cemented tailings, what's left after you take out the ore, will surpass UN standards. And so we're very, very proud of that. But one of the things that our investors were not used to is our litigious nature in the U.S. When we live here, we know that any natural resource project is going to have legal challenges to it here. And that is not the case worldwide. So that is something you really have to get international investors used to. Because when they invested in us, it was because they were looking for an environmentally friendly mine, just like the other ones that they could do very well and with a very small footprint. So this was new to them. And so that's been our biggest challenge is what's been taking up time and resources is the legal front.
Right. Good luck with that continued process. Okay, so let's... Sorry. Keep going.
It's going very well.
Do you have a background in economic development? I think you do.
Do I? Yes.
Yeah.
My previous life, I did mostly international trade for Farm Bureau on agriculture products. So that is definitely my background and my love, and my business econ degree from Montana State. Yes.
Hoo-yah. So you're very familiar with that unglamorous long slog that actually then leads to capital investment and job creation. Excellent, thanks. Okay, so let's shift gears and go over to the exporter side of our panel here. And I want to start with Holly. Are there export markets that you have an interest in, but you think they're kind of particularly difficult to crack? And I thought I heard you mention that tariffs were really kind of an impediment there. Are there other non-tariff trade barriers too?
Well, Brazil is our biggest if we're trying to get into that market for sure. Otherwise, so far, no, not really. We haven't run into too many issues thus far. Time will tell, but for now, knock on wood, all is pretty okay on that front.
Okay, that sounds good. Just out of curiosity, the countries that have those high tariffs that you're talking about, are they countries that we actually have negotiated free trade agreements with? So hopefully they're on the way down, or don't know?
I don't really know.
Well, hopefully. I mean, that's one of the points of free trade agreements, right? Just getting to the point where we have mutually beneficial trading arrangements and we can kind of jettison those tariffs, which I don't like on either side of the equation, frankly. Okay, so Diana, same question. How about you?
We really haven't had any markets that we haven't entered that we wanted to. We took a look at India. We did a market research project on India. Ultimately decided that if it happens, it happens. Otherwise, we're not going to actively market to them. We're pretty happy with the countries we're in. We've had some really challenging countries, Mauritania, DR Congo, Burkina Faso. So we're not afraid of difficult countries. I mean, we are actually in Russia. So it's just a matter of how much resources we want to put to them. I think that's a good statement there.
Sure, you have to prioritize.
Mm-hmm.
We are SMEs, after all, predominantly here. So one more question for our exporters, and then we'll jump back over to the FDI types and our predictions and insights. So we've all felt the pain of supply chain disruptions over the last couple of years. And do you think that, so I'll go to you, Diana, again. Is Tohol in a position to grow business in 2022? If not, are supply chain woes to blame or other? I mean, everybody's so eager to get out of pandemic, but I don't know. Are we there yet? You tell us.
I think 2022 is going to be a great year. However, we do have a few small supply chain issues. But I'll just tell you a little bit of insight into the Pacific, the Long Beach situation with the vessels. And I'll give you a website to kind of track if you'd like. Every day I get an email from two websites. One is gcaptain.com and the other one is splash247.com. It gives you a little more information than Fox News or CNN on what's going on with the shipping. But what's going on is within 2 weeks, we're going to have 112 vessels sitting in their bay at Long Beach. On Thursday, they were going to reroute about 30 to 40 to Miami. They were going to go through the Panama Canal, and the Port of Miami had availability. They could offload them right away. But on Friday morning, Governor Newsom from California signed an executive order to try to keep those vessels there because they would be losing income. So I don't know what's going on with those vessels, but you can find out a little bit more detail about some of that information on those websites.
It didn't, I feel like Biden, and maybe in conjunction with Governor Newsom, announced that the port would be open 24/7 then?
That's true, but 30% of the truck appointments are not being met.
Wow.
So if you don't have truck drivers, we're down 80,000 truck drivers. And if there's no truck drivers, your cargo's not going anywhere. So that's another issue that we have.
So you mean this ties to workforce shortages also? Yes, absolutely. I hadn't heard that stat yet, but obviously there's a real dearth of CDL, out there. Okay, let's go over and then on our predictions and insights section, and I want to start with Heather and ask, what global trends do you think might impact your business in 2022, 2023? What's that look like?
Workforce shortages.
Yeah.
We're down about 150 positions, and these are, an average of 110 grand a piece. Basic benefits. We have a line life of 30 to 80 years, depending on which numbers you're looking at. And I think, can we get enough workers to do the work that we have to do to meet our commitments to? I think that trend is pretty huge for us. It really is a very base level need. I feel like we're at the very bottom of Maslow's hierarchy right now. It's like we have all these, really cool technology. All this great higher level stuff we want to do, but right now we really just need people to go get rock out of the ground.
Department of Labor and Industry guys, raise your hands. Come on, you too. Yep, okay. Make sure you talk after this event, because I know that DLI is really trying to get a lot more creative and proactive in terms of how they are meeting the needs of individual businesses and industry sectors overall. So talk to these guys. All right, well, and everybody start having more babies. No, okay. It's late in the day. It gets a little crazy up here. All right, and then actually let's go to Nancy. And I'm just curious, I mentioned your background in economic development before, and I just wondered from your perspective, and maybe I'll just ask the same of Heather as well. Are there industries, what other industries do you feel are likely to make investments in Montana? Are there sort of ancillary businesses that are associated with what you're doing or will be doing and what Sibanye is already doing?
I'll start with saying I loved the last presentation on succession planning because I think Montana is really positioning itself well for investment from worldwide. That we have the quality of life here that everybody wants. So I think you're going to see all kinds of ancillary businesses come in. Not just for mining, overall, it's great to see tech moving here as well. And there will be small businesses that come in. And we'll also be able to support a lot of local businesses. From our project, one of the things I'm super excited is that we're talking directly to another local business, Red Ants Pants, possibly making all of our uniforms. And so there's going to be a lot of opportunities for synergies such as this. And we have been meeting with the Department of Labor. Cole was at our place last week. So happy to share that one of the things that he helped us do is we're getting ready to sign a contract with Montana Tech's Highland College to bring in one of their staff to create, they'll be working on our staff to create a 2-year program called Mining Technology degree. And so every single person that works at our mine will have a path to a 2-year degree, and then if they want to go on, a path to a 4-year degree through Montana Tech. And so we're trying to be proactive on that front, and they're very interested because they're going to have a set of classes and certifications that hopefully can be used across the board with other natural resource businesses, and they're doing this with other businesses as well in different industries. So super excited that the university system is thinking outside the box as well.
Yeah, stackable certificates that are immediately recognized by industry, and yeah. Okay, how about you, Heather? Thoughts?
We're working on some similar things, and maybe I'll talk about even a step lower. We've been working with the local high schools and been talking to School District 2 and to our local schools, and I think the answer to a lot of this, and you guys said it in the succession planning, I mean, we have the ability to connect here, right? We know each other. I mean, we can get a background on each other. We have a desire to connect. I mean, I grew up on a ranch in Bridger. I'm passionate about rural vitality. I think we can do a lot of things together. And I think the more that we can all start thinking like that, how do we get our kids, I mean, obviously, if they want to leave, go forth and fly away, but let's create opportunities here where we can sort of use the resources that we have. We can do things, we're passionate about doing things responsibly, environmentally, and I think that our local kids, they're our best employees statistically. I mean, we are way better off hiring our local farm and range kids than to go get a trained miner from Nevada or Alaska on statistics. So, but I think we have to do all of this together. We have to start creating these kind of interweb relationships because we don't have enough resources right now. And I think there are still people who, I know it sounds easy to go get a job, but if we don't create the right pathways for training, if we don't get kids interested in mining when they're 12, we've missed the boat. And I think we're really trying to work on that right now. How do we get, we're doing a lot of that through our Women in Mining group, where we're trying to get out to the schools and say, biodiversity, there are so many jobs that these concepts that kids, that will actually catch kids' attention that can be parlayed into work that we're doing. But I think that's our biggest task right now, is how do we match up the resources we have with the work we need to do?
Yeah, and trades, employees, and workforce in general, as a nation, we're starving for it. I mean, lots of reasons why, not the least of which is that we've spent the last generation telling our kids it's not desirable for them to go into anything except a 4-year degree. That's just not right? We actually need that workforce. It's actually a very viable and fulfilling career path, and I think we do our kids a disservice when we just kind of point them in one direction and make it seem like, and you're absolutely right. You got to catch them young, right? So, okay. All right, a little bit off the point there, but, and I want to, just kind of underscoring the need, right? Okay, before you all start checking your mobile devices to see what's next or how close you are to that drink that we're all going to have, I just have one final plea for you, and then we do have just a little bit of time for questions. Our organization does an annual international trade and investment survey. So if you are an exporting firm, an importing firm, or a firm that is funded through FDI, we would like to hear from you so that we're not just making up statistics. No, we work with the Bureau of Business and Economic Research to do this, and this will be our second year. So please, even if you're not in the bucket of one of these firms that will fill it out, and thank you, Tom, because I know that Spica did last year, please share with the folks in your network. And some teasers, because we actually have a live link to the survey that's available on our website right now. But some teasers, without attributing directly to anyone, of course, from our survey. Over 60% of our respondents reported negative impacts of U.S. tariffs put in place over the last few years, 3% positive impacts, and the rest no impacts. And then also on the optimistic front, because we are an optimistic bunch, the vast majority of firms that have responded so far anticipate increased revenues in 2022, increased wages in 2022, and an increase in capital expenditures in 2022. So that is all I have. That's me, and this is our fabulous panel. Thank them, but then let's do a couple questions. Thanks. All right. Easy questions only.
Right.
No. All right.
I can do one real quick.
Sure.
Just curious from all four of you panelists, when it comes to employee retention, just as challenging as that generally is, and then you take pandemic and all the other issues that we've been talking about today, if your company has had to take an extra step to make employee retention even stronger than it is, what have been some of the things your company has done to achieve even a higher rate? Or if you haven't had to do anything, that's great too, because that means your folks are staying anyway. But are you facing the challenge, and what are you doing to address that to keep your best people?
That's the $100,000 question, isn't it? This is a question that is a bit out of my wheelhouse, to be honest, but from an employee who is happily employed with their company, and I'm not just saying that because Brian Wood's sitting right over here. But no, the Wood Company does such a tremendous job of recognizing that there is life outside of work. And being it's a third generation, fourth generation up and coming company. They offer us a lot of intangibles, which they're difficult, I think, for the people who are just starting in with the company to recognize. But from somebody that's been there for multiple years, the intangibles, no flack for a sick kid sort of thing. The human aspect of life and work, and kind of uniting those two together. Woods has done a very, very good job of that. I know that that's tricky to get, somebody maybe that's 18, 19, 20 years old that comes in and is building a product that maybe they're not quite as passionate about, to recognize. But I think that they're doing a good job of, trying to be competitive from the pay scale standpoint, but also, maintaining those benefits that we've always had, and doing their best not to take them away, but rather sustain them or even improve when able. The company has been doing a very good job of maintaining those types of benefits to the employee. Again, it's a bit out of my wheelhouse, but I think that's a really important aspect of retaining an employee, is just making sure that they know that they're a human and not a robot.
Well, TowHaul's been flexible since day one, and I worked there a really long time. Don't want to tell you the number. Decades, yeah, it's true. But we really haven't lost any employees in the pandemic. There's been a couple that have a little bit of flexibility to work from home when needed. But if anything, we've grown. We've hired people. So, but we've had a really cool place to work anyway. I mean, it's not just a flexibility, but it's more like a family environment. We do stuff together. We just had a movie day. We hung out and watched a movie for a little while, and just things like that. Our Christmas party is a big deal. I don't know, just do stuff. So.
You know, our employees are fairly small yet, but we do have a lot of people that are applying to jobs, and I think one of the things that is really appealing to young people is that, especially if they're planning on families, that we're looking at leave when you have a baby for both men and women, and that's pretty appealing. And then we're also looking. Probably our biggest issue is going to be childcare. There is not a lot of childcare in White Sulphur, and we're talking a lot about, do we need to build a childcare facility and make the workers, and I know Stillwater's looking at the same thing, members of our staff, or what do we do on that front? And Heather and I do talk about these things quite a bit. And so that's one of the things we're really looking at. Another challenge for us is going to be an external challenge, and that's housing. Like across all of Montana, 18 months ago we had quite a bit of housing possibilities, and now there's none. Everybody has found Montana. So we're looking at subdivision regs in our community. We're looking at how do we expand, and those, I guess, are more external challenges than internal challenges.
Yeah, I'd like to trade comments with the exporters. We're in a rough spot. I mean, it is hard. You know, we are really struggling with a strong economy. I mean, why would you take a 2-hour each-way commute on a bus to go work underground when you could go build bridges in, Billings and be home at, 5 p.m. every night? So we're trying to really work on this human-friendly workplace, on inclusion, but when you're working shift work and you have our travel distances and the housing issues in our small communities, just as availability, I think exactly what Nancy said. I think we're really exploring everything we can, but we do have higher than average attrition right now, and I think it can just be tied directly to the really strong economy. I mean, we have really high-paying jobs, and they're really generally secure jobs, and again, we have a lot of my life, but it is really hard to compete. Sometimes you can't pay someone enough to take our commute, so that leads us right back to, if we can hire more local people, that's obviously better, but it's a really challenging position right now in this strong economy.
We're done, right? Please join me in thanking these women as well.
I need to get your card. What? Your card. Oh, yeah, it's where I got a table over there.
My social media intern says, take pictures of the crowd, not from the crowd. So you're all in our picture there. Thank you.
Thanks, ladies. Yeah,
Thank you, Brigitte. That was fun. You have a life as a second career, I think, if you would like to pursue it. I hope you all appreciated kind of the wealth of expertise that you just heard here from Montana. Right? We covered in-depth logistics, geopolitics, logistic chains. I mean, I think I've learned more about the Port of LA here than I have in the last week and a half of watching news. And so, that's all right here in Montana. I think we should be very, very proud of what we're producing in Montana. I got to tell you a quick little story. Kim Wilde is here and with Tow Haul. It's kind of interesting. The founder of Tow Haul, Frank Smith, lives just down the hill from where I live over in the Paradise Valley. And Frank Smith is one of the most wonderful human beings you'll ever meet in your life. Very committed to Montana, very committed to Belgrade, and very committed to his company, Tow Haul. And so he's become good family friends of our entire family. Frank's a big musician and big fan of country music, and he has a little side venue, if you will, there at the Music Ranch over there in the Paradise Valley. Some of you have heard of it. If you haven't been over there, he has a wonderful lineup during the summer, and Frank and his wife Karen are wonderful hosts. And so thank you for being members of the Montana Chamber of Commerce. We appreciate it. So don't let me stand in the way of a drink, but before you head out, I would like to give you a couple little housekeeping points. One, we will have breakfast set up here tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock, so feel free to come in and have breakfast. Next door, we're going to have a bar and some appetizers set up, so please go over there. And as you are over there, I want to make sure that you take a minute to thank the sponsors that made that all possible, that helped us put together the bar and the event that we had here today and for tomorrow. So at our top level sponsors, we've got Alexander Hutton. Thank you guys again. Boeing, Rich White is here all the way in from Seattle. Thank you, Rich, another great manufacturer here in Montana. First Interstate Bank, Montana State Fund, Northwestern Energy, and Stockman Bank, all at the gold level. Our other sponsors that we have are silver level, our Century Gaming. Steve Arnson was over there. Thank you, Steve. Steve's always been a great supporter of the Montana Chamber and is also on the board of directors. Charter Communications, Montana Department of Transportation and their Disadvantaged Business Enterprise Program, the Montana Youth Entrepreneur or Montana Youth Apprenticeship Program Partnership, Payne West Insurance, Pacific Source Health Plans. It must be getting late. My tongue is getting thicker as the night goes along. Washington Companies, Western Security Bank. Thank you guys. Got to meet you earlier today. Thank you for being here and being sponsors. Our copper level sponsors, I'm going to have to quit real quick. First Call Solutions, Montana Electric Co-op Association, Montana Hydraulics, Sterling CRE Advisors, Tow Hall, and then our vendors that we've got over there today. We had a few more of vendors, but this damn COVID continues to wreak havoc on our lives, and so we lost a few vendors that came down with complications associated with COVID. DIS Technologies, Montana Correctional Enterprises, Montana Department of Commerce, and UBS. This concludes today. Thank you all for participating. Thanks again to our sponsors. We'll see you in the morning after we have a cocktail next door.